Welcome to a joint seminar between Bandung Institute of Technology and the University of Melbourne with the theme Smart City Ecosystem or Initiative. The joint seminar focuses on presenting and sharing best smart city practices for both cities and villages. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Uli Fauzia from ITB, who would be the moderator in this session. Next, Pak Fikri. Okay. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. This event will be divided into 9 segments. Let me read them to you. The event will be begin by an opening speech from the Dean of SIPPD ITB, Ibu Dr. Sri Mariati. Then it will be continued by keynote speech from Professor Nicolas. The 3rd to 7th segments are the presentation by 5 of our speakers today, namely Dr. Adiwan Aritenang, Dr. Hermanta Doloi, Dr. Ragu Dharmapuri Tirumala, Dr. Julie Miao, and Dr. Amanda Ahmadi. The 8th segment is the question and answer session that I will moderate. If you have any question from speaker, I hope you can write them in the chat column by introducing yourself, the purpose of the question to which speaker, and your question. At the end of the event, I will convey the conclusion and closing of this joint seminar event. We will continue the next session, the opening speech of the Dean of SIPPD ITB to Ibu Dr. Sri Mariati, please.
Yeah, thank you, Uli. Distinguished speakers and participants all over the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Assalamualaikum, warmest greetings from Bandung, Indonesia. Thank you all for coming and joining us here today in the joint seminar between Bandung Institute of Technology and the University of Melbourne, Smart City Ecosystem or Initiative. This seminar is a collaboration between the Regional and City Planning Study Program, School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, Bandung Institute of Technology, with the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning, University of Melbourne. Smart City Initiative have developed around the world and are believed to provide various conveniences in life. These initiatives are increasingly developing during the COVID-19 pandemic. In the context of policy, Indonesia is targeting to have 150 smart cities by 2025. The smart city is a complex ecosystem of people, processes, policies, technology, and other enablers working together to deliver a set of outcomes. Various challenges must be solved to realize a smart city. And this is the opportunity for us to discuss the challenges and also the solution to realize the smart city concept. On behalf of the School of Architecture, Planning and Policy Development, Bandung Institute of Technology, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to all speakers and moderators for their kind support to this seminar. Thank you very much, Professor Nicolas, the Chair of Urban Planning and Associate Dean for International Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning, the University of Melbourne. We hope that this collaboration can continue to grow. We also express our gratitude to other colleagues from the University of Melbourne, Professor Hermanta Doloi, Dr. Ragu Dharmapuri Tirumala, Professor Julie Miao, Dr. Amanda Ahmadi, and also the speaker from ITB, Dr. Adiwan Fahlan Aritenang, the chair of undergraduate program in regional and city planning. And also the moderator, Ms. Uli Fauzia. Thank you very much. A very warm welcome to all of you. I believe that the seminar will bring new insight for all of us and open opportunity for collaborative initiative between academics, institutions, and participants. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you for the welcome, Ibu Dr. Sri Mariati. The next event was the presentation of keynote speaker in this seminar, Professor Nicolas. It is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Professor Nicolas is Chair of Urban Planning and Associate Dean International in the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne. Prior to this, he was Professor of Urban and Regional Development in the Bartlett School of Planning and Provost Regional at University College London. He has research interests covering the planning and politics of suburbanization and the urban economic agglomeration. I invite Professor Nicolas to give his keynote speaker. Please. Please.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, just struggling with the mute and unmute. I shouldn't be after all this time, but yes. Can you see my slides as well, hopefully?
Yes.
Yeah. So let me just put them larger. Okay, so hopefully you can see the whole screen now. Well, thank you very much, Dean Sri Mariati, for the introduction and the welcome to the seminar. Much appreciated, and thank you also to Adiwan for partly organizing this event. I'm greatly honored to be a keynote speaker, as always, but doubly so, given that probably I'm the least qualified to talk about smart city ideas. Certainly have an interest in the generalities of the smart city discussion, and that's really what I'm going to be talking about. So there'll be other of my colleagues in Melbourne, but also Adiwan as well, and colleagues at ITB will almost certainly know a lot more about smart city technologies, smart city policies, etc. So what I'm going to do is try and offer a few quite general thoughts, and you can see the title there, which is the when and the where of smart city. So a couple of really quite basic questions, prompts, observations, hopefully that resonate with much of what people will talk about in the remainder of the sessions. So I'll just briefly talk about the structure. It's a very simple structure. I'll say the acknowledgement of country, and there's a reason for saying these words. We say them at every meeting, really in places like the University of Melbourne and across Australia. This is a recognition of Indigenous owners of land, but it has a relevance, I think, to what I'm going to say later on. So I'll come back to it. I'll say very quickly a few words of introduction. Then the two key themes really is the when question and the where question. And like I say, they're really just prompts. They're not, deeply thought out through deep empirical investigation. So let me just start with those words. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from where I'm speaking, and these are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Okay, and I'll come back to these words, the words of the past, the present, and emerging generations, because I think these are words we say all the time in Australia to acknowledge traditional owners of the land, but it's also an interesting thing to think about, the intergenerational transference of knowledge and ideas. And I think it is relevant to thinking about what smart means. Okay, some of what I'm going to draw upon comes from a couple of publications, and Adiwan was involved with one of these, a special issue in the Development Journal, International Development Planning Review. I suppose raising this idea of the innovativeness or the inventiveness of urban and economic informality. So a series of papers drawn from around the world, including Adiwan and colleagues' contributions on Indonesia, and partly from a new book of my own, which does touch very briefly at various points on smart city ideas, not especially from a technological angle, but simply to think about the planning imagination. So I'll probably be drawing on both of those. And like I said, I don't come at this from a particularly technological angle. Anyone who knows me will probably laugh at the thought of me being technologically sophisticated. I'm certainly not. So I want to start off with this whole idea of when is smart or when was smart, and just think in very broad terms about the nature of what it is we do when we are engaged in urban planning. You know, urban planning certainly has a sort of a backward glance, let's say, in terms of what it does. You know, there is a sense in which we want to excavate and understand something about the past of the places that we plan. I do sometimes wonder whether that is now forgotten about, this as a task of something to do when we urban plan, particularly so in an era of smart city technologies, because smart city technologies are all about the present. I'll come on to that in just a moment. So planning has always had, I suppose, a bit of a backward glance. I wonder whether we do this as fully or as meaningfully as we perhaps have done, even in the recent past, and whether we do it well enough. So, you know, that backward glance would draw or could draw upon the wisdom of indigenous populations, for example, which is in a place like Australia, you know, really quite ancient, you know, tens of thousands of years. Obviously, when we talk about urban planning, we tend to be very obsessed or concerned with the present conditions that we have to deal with. But I think the great lesson, or one of the lessons that we can take from that acknowledgement to country, is that the present is just a moment in a historical stream of thoughts and practice about making places. Okay, and I think that is at least one of the lessons that we can take from that set of words about the past, the present, and emerging generations. So indigenous knowledges remind us, I think, of the stewardship of the earth that we should be exercising, and of some of our intergenerational responsibilities. And I think, you know, sometimes some of that can be lost. If you're talking about smartness, you would presumably include that as one key ingredient, let's say. They extend, I think, to ways of knowing and ways of communicating knowledge, which you know, perhaps we're less used to celebrating in a lot of our teaching and scholarship of urban planning or urban design. That is oral traditions and simply ways of knowing which are not often subject to codification, as they would be in global north, ideas of knowledge and communication of knowledge. You know, in the global north, I suppose the past is something which is essentially dead and unknowable, but certainly you're aware of a greater sense of the past being alive and filled with knowledge and peoples and ancestors, let's say, in a way which is not dead and which is knowable. And I suppose, you know, that glance backwards, I think, is quite important. And I wonder whether we do it well enough. And I wonder whether some of what's implied in some of the smart city ideas, particularly heavy use of big data, real-time data on the present, really leaves us forgetting some of these longer term knowledges, if you like. Obviously, we are concerned with the present and the challenges of the present. And I think that's where smart city technologies, the data that's available to us is really rather different from even 10 or 20 years ago. And I suppose it's very much about the question, you could badge it as being about the survival in the present, the use of things to hand. And I suppose my query here is whether that can really ever be all that planning is about. I don't think it can be. And of course, we need to think about the future when we think about urban planning, because I think, you know, most people would probably understand urban planning as a future-oriented act, something of what Abram and Weslasky's talk about as a compact between now and the future, some sort of deal that we set ourselves about what we want to make in the future. So a bit of a long-winded sort of introductory slide, but I really wanted to just put smartness in this sort of longer-term time frame in which, you know, smart city ideas tend to be, you know, focused very much on the present, if you like. So let's have a think about that presentness, if you like, of the use of big data, real-time visualizations, buildings, cities bristling with technology, the sort of contemporary rendering of smart in this way as about the present, I wonder whether it is also contributing to what some people have termed the speed up of society. So society's become ever more sped up. We are more productive with our days than we probably were, partly due to technology. We do things quicker. We respond to messages quicker. And it's worth thinking through what some of the implications are of this speed up, okay? In this sense, I think smart city, smart village is, you could equate it with being clever. And when I think of that word clever, I tend to think of somebody being, quick of thought. They can think on their feet quickly. They can come up with a smart or a clever idea or response, okay? And there's certainly a value in that. But just to pose a question, I wonder whether that's always what is needed or required to have a good solution to various problems. And I'll come back to this in just a moment. So in this view, I think of the present, smart is clever. It's about quickness of thought with an issue that is live presently. It's about pragmatism in the here and now, if you like. There are some challenges that come with this, I think. Concentrating on the here and now, concentrating on being very pragmatic in the present. If society is speeding up, a number of people have pointed to the paradox that just as we have more information of all sorts available to us through technologies, there's also a sense of a loss of information, or knowledge perhaps is a better way of putting it, a loss of information, particularly from institutions. Pollitt talks about institutional amnesia, the forgetting of key lessons. Okay, are we about to reinvent the wheel several times, or are we simply about to lose valuable information about what worked in the past because we're focusing solely on the present? We have lots and lots of information, but information is, of variable quality. Okay, it's not the same thing as knowing what to do with it, if you like. The presentation of real-time data, big data, often in video format, essentially a video or a film of what is happening, unfolding in time. Is that planning? This is the sort of question that I typically ask some of our students. Is this the same as planning? You could argue, and the picture on the right-hand side there might be familiar to many of you because it's taken from the Bandung Smart City sort of planning gallery, I think. You could argue that the focus on using visualization of big data, real-time data, is a sort of a failure to plan. It takes the planning out of things. It's a visualization, but is it a plan, and does it involve planning? Okay, it's something to which people react instantaneously. And if we're failing to plan, then a goal without a plan is just a wish, as this phrase has it in the Bandung gallery. Is it really just about troubleshooting of the existing system without challenging what the system should be? Okay, I certainly get that sense when we go to the control room in a place like Bandung or Jakarta or any other city across the world. It's really about real-time troubleshooting of issues that are bubbling up, minute to minute, hour to hour, if you like. And I've said this, I don't know if it's a phrase that resonates with anyone, but smart can become just the more efficient delivery of the present. Okay, it's about increasing productivity, increasing the efficiency with which problems are solved without necessarily thinking about the future and a different way of being, if you like. And of course, worse still, the focus on performance and the measurement of performance can have quite severe unintended consequences. Okay, measurement of performance, metrics and performance societies, as Mao and Stark have argued, induce competition among places and among individuals within places. So is this something we want to increase, we want to heighten? It's I think part of the dilemma that we face with smart city ideas. Just to kind of keep plugging away at this potential problem. This is a quote from quite a famous book about Australian cities by Hugh Stretton. The only thoroughly uninteresting qualities of interactions, which are generally not worth valuing at all, are their number and frequency. And I guess, you know, a lot of smart technologies, applications are specifically designed to generate data about frequencies and numbers of interactions or events taking place. It's the qualities of those interactions that matter perhaps more when we're thinking about, you know, forward-looking in terms of building better cities. And you might recognize this, the back of this handsome young man, one of our presenters and co-organizers in the event, Adiwan, here in, again, the Bandung Planning Gallery. And this is a kind of a room where people are allowed to put their thoughts about, I guess, you know, what kind of city they would like to see Bandung become. And I guess this emphasizes the point that, you know, perhaps the more interesting and colorful side of things are all of these post-it notes which express people's, you know, desires for the city. And these will be qualitative things that can't necessarily be codified. Okay. So, you know, smart can render places which are unique or inimitable sort of comparable in this process of measurement. And that is something we need to be a little bit wary of, because, you know, thinking about planning as an activity, we want to draw upon the uniqueness, the history of places and build upon it, not erase it, let's say. Could it be the opposite of good placemaking if design is designing with nature, if you like? And part of that nature is obviously the history of the environment in which we're building a city. And I suppose this gets me onto the point about whether the alternative view that smart could be about being philosophical, it could be about being slow, it could be about being thoughtful, and that we need to take time to be thoughtful, to be philosophical, to pause, to perhaps reflect on some of the big data and the real-time data that we have, but to not react instantaneously, okay? To take that information and to take it alongside any number of other pieces of information, some of which cannot be codified. Time is needed to plan. It's needed to gain information because, you know, despite the massive amounts of information that are out there, perhaps we need better information, better quality information, information on parts of the city that is simply missing, okay? We need time to negotiate with all kinds of stakeholders within the city. It needs to be a deliberative and a participatory sort of process, if you like. Time might even be needed to gain credibility. Remember, the planning system can be viewed with great suspicion by a lot of people, a lot of ordinary citizens. We certainly know this from things like relocation of street vendors and the like. And we need time to act with consistency of approach. And this is a luxury you often don't have. Politicians come and go. Even planning officials within local governments, you know, now tend to move on, particularly in the global north. The personnel in planning departments is always frequently changing, and this doesn't really help when we're thinking about having a sort of thoughtful process of place making. So where is smart? Okay, the sort of second question. And again, I'm sure there are other points that all of you could think of. But I'm just going to boil it down to a few ideas, and they might spark some further conversation. I think when we think about smart city ideas generally across the global north, they seem to be quite linked to concerns, issues, genuine challenges, I think, of corporate exploitation of urban data. I think major corporations, IT corporations, etc., have woken up to the fact that along with academics, that the city is important. They've woken up to the fact that the city is this receptor or generator of information of all sorts, information that can be directly useful to companies, but of course can be sold on. We all know this from having our sort of mobile phones and numbers sold on by numerous insurance companies and the like. That's why we get all the nuisance calls. information is money, and urban information seems to be particularly valuable as a commodity, if you like. So this is the valorization of the city and of data relating to the city and its citizens, which previously didn't seem to have much of a value, or certainly was not used as a sort of profitable enterprise. And I guess it raises the question of who should be benefiting. Is it corporations? Is it governments? Is it citizens? Or is it mixes of these three? Julie Miao may say more about this, shortly in her talk. But I think Julie and myself in our joint research are certainly aware that there is now a bit of an international battle going on, if you like, to lead the field in terms of urban solutions. And so urban solutions have themselves become an industry, an export industry, and of course information data is central to exploiting some of that. So who exploits it and for what purpose, if you like? We can see issues of the capture of city governments, hardware and software by large corporations, so IBM and Cisco Systems. Once cities purchase some of the sort of hardware and software solutions, they're essentially locked into providers who may have very little interest in helping city leaders in doing things better. They may have their own agenda, and I know that's certainly been a concern in some city corridors, if you like, particularly in the global north, but also elsewhere. Would we be surrendering to the code? Okay, we already, when we plan cities in most parts of the world, think of planning as a regulatory activity that uses codes, regulations to separate land uses, tell people what they can and can't do in particular places. So planning often is criticized for being overly regulatory, the use of codes. In other words, we've possibly surrendered too much in terms of planning thinking to codifying the order of space within cities, as compared to things like vision, scenarios, strategy making, which are much more qualitative and perhaps longer term in viewpoint. Does smart city idea entail a second surrender to the code, this time the software code? And to come back to my own technological inability, I think the only software program I learned, and that's a long time ago when I was a student, was Fortran, which is really showing my age. But software code is essentially unknowable to most ordinary citizens. It, of course, has glitches. It can be hacked. And it has its inbuilt biases, no doubt. Just think of, sort of algorithms such as Google Scholar and the way in which, articles and scholars are ranked. And as we've discussed, this sort of measurement of performance has its own distortions. It creates biases, and it fosters competition within a citizen, within cities, among citizens, and between places. That's a slightly negative view, I suppose. Of course, there are other examples where information can be used in possibly a more positive sense. So I'm aware of the sort of so-called Helsinki model now, with the collapse of Nokia, the mobile phone company. Helsinki city government has been trying to open up as much of its urban data as it can, on the basis that this data availability will produce a so-called mass flourishing of a new private sector for Finland, a new sort of raft of tech companies to replace the collapsed Nokia. So that's their way of thinking about the value of smart city technologies and big data. You've got other models, and again, Julie could probably speak more persuasively to this than I can. In Barcelona has been through this problem of being captured by one of the big tech companies and not wanting to go down that road, and so has again also made its sort of government sort of data and software platforms, open access, if you like. So precisely with the view to making policy making much more democratic. So drawing upon a sort of tradition within Spain of grassroots activism at the sort of neighborhood level of citizens in the 1970s and 80s, lobbying government for more services, more urban amenities. Well, now that the new incarnation of that, if you like, is the democratization of the policy making process by giving people access to data and making it much easier for them to vote on key decisions. Where does smart reside? Well, I mentioned earlier on that there are some instances in which data information, let alone big data, simply doesn't exist. Okay, and that's true in a lot of the global south, where things like census data collecting simply does not penetrate accurately into many communities, many of which might have been built informally and very rapidly. So the census never really keeps up with this. So does SMART still reside with indigenous populations or else marginalized populations? And I'm thinking both North and South, global North and global South. We've mentioned ancient wisdoms of connections to and respect for land and climate. And that's very much the what's implied, I think, in that acknowledgement to country, the kind of intergenerational transference of knowledge. How do we sort of not just tap into it, but respect it and understand what it can mean for us in a planning sense? That is knowledge that has rarely been recorded, let alone codified. And of course, global South, cities, data has to be created or collected at the neighborhood level by citizens and by NGOs. And again, this is probably familiar to some of you. This is sort of mapping exercise that has been done by NGO Yayasan Kota Kita in collaboration with local citizens as a first step in participatory budgeting with the city of Solo. So in other words, the first step for citizens is to understand what it is they've got, what assets they have, what amenities are in poor supply or in poor condition, and that gives them a voice to go to local government planners and to persuade and lobby for better conditions, if you like. The whole meaning of SMART in some ways might need to be redefined. If we think about the economics discipline talks about invention and innovation. So invention being the creation of brand new products and services that haven't been thought of before, and innovation, the sort of incremental improvement of existing products and services, which is nevertheless codifiable, protectable in intellectual property terms legally. But this contrasts greatly with what happens in the global South, where there is a lot of ingenuity. Okay, this is the word I'd probably use. Does the meaning of SMART need to be more inclusive than what we tend to think of in global North language? We've got a couple of examples here. On the bottom here, I quite like this picture. You may be able to see it. In the background is a poster called for Solo Entrepreneur Days, and you might just be able to make out that the person in the poster is a man, and that man is in a suit, a bit like Joseph Schumpeter. Okay, this is the image of an entrepreneur, a man, a suited man. But the reality of a lot of entrepreneurs in a place like Indonesia and elsewhere is in the foreground. This is a man, but it might probably more commonly be a woman selling food from a vendor stall. And that's not to say that these activities are not innovative or ingenious, because typically they will offer new snacks and new combinations of foods as and when tastes dictate. So you have this kind of big disjuncture between what in global North we think of as being smart or innovative and what the massive innovation or ingenuity is across the global South. The picture in the top is also a great illustration of this. These are people who are making a living by taking discarded patches of cloth from factories, again in Solo, and very, very cleverly cutting them and stitching them together to make sort of secondhand clothes for the poorest in society. And of course, they themselves are pretty poor. They've built their houses and their little workshops on top of a cemetery in this case. Now, that is smart to me. It's recycling materials, so contributing to circular economy, incredibly ingenious in terms of finding out about these otherwise wasted resources, but also ingenious in terms of the care with which they are cutting the patterns and sewing them together. So, interesting examples that speak to the way in which ingenuity, often uncodifiable, is nevertheless central to the vibrancy of the city across the global south, and things that we need to start thinking about in the global north, because many of our global north urban economies have become quite sterile, partly through to planning, squeezing out a lot of informal economic activities. And I suppose my plea here is that, that the kind of ingenuity that exists across the global south, which is pretty smart, if you ask me, lies somewhere between Clifford Geertz's idea of involution, changeless change, as he referred to it, which is probably a bit unfair, and Schumpeter's rather unlikely heroic inventor, which is unlikely even in the global north, and pretty difficult across the global south. Let me finish up then just by pulling together some of this, and I apologize again for not bringing a lot of this back to technology. It's really a much broader discussion than technology, but technology is in there. The imagination to better plan our cities, I believe now is much more fundamentally distributed than possibly ever before. There's no organization or set of individuals or actors that has a monopoly on that imagination or the wisdom required to do things better and to have better outcomes for the majority of people, to build cities that are more inclusive, if you like, and sustainable. The urban planning imagination, you could think of it being a judicious mix of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, rather than simply the pragmatism of today that I think sometimes dominates with smart city ideas. That is the wisdom of the past, and also the aspiration of looking forward, okay? Best not to forget those two other ingredients. It's probably a combination of being quick, but also being slow in the right measure. We could possibly think of it being about a combination of some of the interests and resources of populations and organizations that are central in many nation states, and populations who are marginal, but who have plenty to bring to the table. If we were thinking about the global north, there is something that comes with the bureaucracy that is typically associated with global north states and their planning systems, which are highly codified, well-resourced, a lot of enforcement behind them, and the global south, where informality tends to defy local government planning and bureaucracies, if you like. And of course, as I said just above, the planning imagination is definitely, I think, distributed these days across the wisdom of citizens, clubs, which you could think of in terms of corporations and voluntary associations, and governments, states. So I think that is all I have to say on smart city issues. Hopefully that stimulated a few ideas and will resonate with some of the other talks later on. But thank you very much. And don't know if we're having time for questions, or whether we bundle them all up together, but intrigued to know what everyone else is going to say too. Thank you.
Thank you for your sharing, Professor Nicolas Pell. Moving right along, the next session is the presentation of 5 speakers of this seminar. The first speaker is Dr. Adiwan Aritenang. He is the head of Urban and Regional Planning undergraduate program, SCPPD at Bandung Institute of Technology. He is a national committee member of Indonesian Urban and Regional Planning Association. He has an interest in several research areas such as regional economic and infrastructure, spatial econometric, creative economy, institution, and international trade. On this occasion, he will present about the production of third place and its role on smart cities, the case of co-working spaces in Bandung. I invite Pak Adiwan to present his presentation.
Thank you, Bu Uli. Let me share my screen. So, So hopefully you can see my screen now.
Yeah, we can see.
Yes, thank you. So we started this project, I think, earlier last year, in early 2020. By that time, Nick and Julie approached me if we could collaborate together on research on Bandung co-working spaces, with the idea that how we see networks and collaboration among the entrepreneurs and academics within the city. However, during our research, Nick had a very interesting idea, because I think he was very much delighted with working in several co-working spaces near to our campus in ITB. And what we saw was that there was a lot of young people, students and professionals that works in these co-working spaces. And we had an idea, how about if we study them and we see if there are any connection between the smart cities that are occurring in Bandung in terms of a lot of research collaborations, startup incubation, and also this young new workers in the gig economy. So with that idea, we start to research this unique places, and together with the community that are embedded within them. In this presentation, I would have 5 parts, I think, from introduction, literature, methods, analysis, and also conclusion. So this is among others of the co-working spaces that are found near to ITB. I think this one is in particular what Nick likes to work in location, locacy, if you remember, Nick. Nick was there, I think, about one and a half week, and after working interviews, he liked to came back to these co-working spaces to get his ideas and preparing for our next interviews. So this during before the pandemic, these locations, these co-working spaces was very busy, very full, with students, with young professionals. So with that idea, we start to look at how do we connect this phenomenon with the literature. So in Bandung itself and the city at all, there's a changing of people behavior and lifestyle, coupled with the advancement of technology, which led to the emergence of third places in cities. And also recent literature on smart city governance also highlights the importance to identify and understand how actors collaborate in shaping the smart city. However, in Indonesia itself, there's been a lack of discussion on how co-working space has produced and its network on its importance on smart cities development. As such, our article that is currently in a draft status examines smart city actor collaboration in the context of co-working space, soft infrastructure, and networks to present date. Using this growing literature on smart city governance ecosystem, it's shown that a smart city may have a potential to increase economic growth by 5%. However, the lack of conceptual map in the literature, especially in Indonesia, explains the limited understanding and integration of the roles of various layers in policy-making stakeholders in many smart cities in Indonesia. As such, we use our research framework by adopting the third place literature, as a literature is relevant to conceptualize sociability of public spaces. Furthermore, we also look at the importance for cities to maintain its vitality through organic changes to make it more expressive and to promote public space into open systems by reducing controls from Senate in the 1970s and 1990. This research itself drawn its research methodology, which involve desk work, field work, and interview methods of studying with a qualitative approach with our data collection. We also use a lot of studies using regulation documents, on-site observations, and also questionnaires and in-depth interviews. The survey was conducted in Bandung from February to September 2020, and we also interview with business owners and also their managers. To analyze this research, we use a stakeholder mapping and also network and spatial analysis to visualize the importance of actor networks and how geographical proximity links between co-working spaces and the main offices or universities and schools for this young generation of workers and visitors of the co-working spaces. Just a brief history of Bandung itself. Since the late or the mid 2000s, they were initiated development of cultural and creative industry, or the CCI, that expanded networks including entrepreneurship, academic research, and also public space redevelopment in the city. As a consequence, interaction among various stakeholders has been intensified in the last 10 years in the city or even more, together with work in flexible hours and also collaboration. We also found that there's a growing number of gig economy workers in the city, from startups, university research, and also from incubators. And this also included many sectors, especially from the startups, including visual communication design, game development applications, interior design, advertising, and also animated films and videos. As such, our analysis showed that the smart city in Bandung is reinforced through two channels. First is the soft infrastructure of co-working space facilities such as events and also incubators. These are mainly found in many co-working spaces. Each of them have different and unique events and incubator spaces, and even some also have mentors that are collaborating with the co-working space to incubate these new startups. On the other hand, there's also actor networks such as the users, the professional associations, startup mentors, and also academics. So from these two channels, the co-working space that we found have their unique kind of startup development and also communities. So it's very rare that one community move around from one co-working space to another. Usually they are attached to one co-working space because within that one particular co-working space, they have networks there, their events, perhaps they also incubate their startups and also their professional associations. As a result, the potential customer and tenants would value highly the networks offered with frequent and regular professional meeting events, meetings between fellow freelancers and also between freelancers and employers. So in these terms, that those we see daily could be the same person or the same community between days, between day to day. And furthermore, each co-working space has their predominant actors that were already established when the co-working space started or joined early. These actors then become the main community that works and hang out in the co-working space and also define its identity. So we can see that one particular community that works and hang out and also communicate with their professional colleagues in only one particular co-working space. For instance, this is a number of co-working space that we interviewed. Some of them are linked or related with universities such as the Bandung Digital Valley. They're neighboring with Telkom University, and then some of them, others like Block 71, Co-Eduplex, are very located nearly to universities in Dago area, including ITB, Unpad, Unicom, and also other schools. And there's also social hub and also workspace. And we also look at in what kind of form they establish their co-working space. Some of them own their own building, and some are just part of a house or a small building with unique facilities, including a workspace or an office space, a meeting room. Some larger one even have their own auditorium to gather events in that co-working space. Now, when we look at the networks, we see that, for instance, in Bandung Digital Valley, it's exclusively for students, while for Block 71, usually it is used by people in the technology and creative startups. And while Co&Co are a relatively loose community, people that came there are usually freelancers and not attached to any particular startups, although there are also special rooms or small offices for these startups. And also they have other facilities such as sharing and events, university, government incubator, and also some also have mentorships such as Bandung Digital Valley, Block 71, Co&Co, Eduplex, and also Workspace 53. While others are just simply for students because they have working space, office space, and also classroom, which are used for people to gather students or their small startup companies to work together in during the day. Just a brief spatial analysis. We also looks at first is from the Telkom University, and we can see that there are a lot of places near the Telkom University in terms of co-working space near to them, and also in ITB here there's also several co-working space near to ITB with where we can see it's just across the road from ITB, where we also found other co-working spaces there. We also look at on how the networks among these co-working spaces. We look at who are their important clients. For instance, many of them are startups and also freelancer, although there are also some of them that have a strong community, such as Block 71 and Lokasi, in addition also to students, and perhaps also some of them are supported by state-owned enterprises. And about their own important context, for instance, mainly are their own owner, startups, and also private companies. This is because they are quite near to offices, while others also have a strong network with creative and technology, some of them with academia, and then with investors also, such as Block 71, which is invested by the Salim Group, and it is has also networked with other Block 71 throughout the Southeast Asia, such as in Singapore. And also in BDV, Bandung Digital Valley, because it is owned by the Telkom University, it also have an internal team to help to collaborate and incubate small startups. And then there's also mentors there, and also business incubator teams. So from that brief analysis, we found that it's crucial for expansion and development for co-working space to provide space for communities to network, gather, and hold events, in addition to providing space for business incubation, and also some of them provide mentorship for the digital startups. Our research also emphasized the importance of soft infrastructure, such as event gatherings, auditorium, and other spaces, and also professional networks, including the mentorship and also business incubation for the existence of co-working space. These types of networks define the role and impact of co-working space contribution in the smart city governance ecosystem, because we see that not only there are freelancers in the gig economy, but also there's a co-work and also mentorship and incubation of startups that are related with the smart city in Bandung. Finally, our paper also enriched the literature by highlighting the importance of co-working space network through geographical proximity and knowledge spillover for creative and technology community in the smart city. Especially, we see that these co-working space are located near to universities such as ITB and Telkom University, which are known for its technological and also reason big data analysis for each of these universities. And with that, I ended my presentation. Thank you very much. And also, before that, I also would like to acknowledge our grant support from the Indonesia Melbourne Research Partnership and also from the Reside Green Research Fund in 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Adiwan, for your sharing. I will continue to the next speaker. The second speaker was Dr. Hemanta Doloi. Hemanta Doloi is currently an associate professor in construction management in the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne, Australia. He's the director of the Smart Villages Lab, SVL. The focus is on the data-driven research in rural construction and development under the auspice of the Smart Villages program. He leads the transdisciplinary research in smart villages for developing solutions for affordable housing and infrastructure system, generating new theories for education and governance and empowering rural communities. Hemanta won the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors Infinite Value Awards in teaching and research, recognizing the excellence of scholarship impacting wider community in the profession. He served as editorial members of a few prestigious journals, including the International Journal of Project Management, Built Environment Project and Asset Management, and Construction Innovation, Information Process Management. He's the founding chair of the International Conference on Smart Villages and Rural Development. He has widely published in the areas of project management, infrastructure planning and policy, construction economic and management, and smart villages. On this session, he will present about smart villages and its significance in rural community development. I invite him to give his presentation, please. Dr. Hemanta Doloi, please.
Yeah, thank you, Uli, and and thank you, the Dean, Sri Marwati, and thank you, Professor Nick Phelps, for inviting me to this presentation. It is my real honor to be able to speak in this great forum and very timely forum, rather. And what Professor Phelps has already discussed as an opening speech, it has given lots of ideas, lots of queries to be conducted, and a great picture that we all need to be aware of about the data-driven urbanization and the policy and planning and all those. And then what the second speaker, Ediwan, presented here is also phenomenal work as well. So I'm very much pleased to continue the work in terms of what we have done, but that is something just to leave to the audience to also raise the queries and draw the synergy as it comes. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share a few slides here. And my work is very much specific to what I have been doing in a very context-specific work. And that doesn't have something directly related to the Indonesian context at this moment. But I understand that this forum is more about, Indonesia and, of course, Australian collaboration. And but I think participants are mainly from Indonesia. So if there is anything that you are not able to understand, please raise the questions with me. So I'm sharing my slides. Hopefully it is coming through. I'll be talking about the smart villages, which is a data-driven approach to rural development. And I think we do not need any new introduction of what is data-driven approach, as Professor Nick Phelps has already clearly identified and explained that. So before I just want to start with this quote, the famous quote by our late President of India. Smart habitation is where the rural and urban divide is reduced to a great thin line. So that was his vision in India a long back. But now, if you look at some of the trends, what is happening in the world today, if you see here, yes, that line is being reduced between the urban and rural divide, but yet there is a big gap. And in fact, what we are seeing more and more globally, that the village populations wanted to be living in the rural, in the urban. So that means the urbanization is taking over the rurality. And if you look at actually in the country-wise trends, in Asia, the rural population becoming urbanized population, that rate is much higher than some other countries around the world. But then what it means, so if in a way of living in a modern world, if 8 billion world population wanted to live in modern world by in the urban settings, so where we are leading to? So what can happen really if everybody wants to really follow the same development cycle over time? So that is where our smart villages research has come in, and that gives a very particular perspectives in terms of whether the rurality itself is a good idea, or there's an alternative way of developing the rural community, which can still develop their potential and enjoy their lifestyle the way the urban people does. So in fact, one of my key hypotheses here is that over last many decades, the rural development literature and urban development literature, they exist. There is no any denial about that. But what I am hypothesizing here, that the rural development model that is given by the mainstream literature has failed to be able to develop the rural in the way they should develop as rural. So they have always been talking about how the rural communities can be brought together to the mainstream urban community. That is what the literature is talking most of the time. So they do have here and there some models of rural development, but they are in bulk a failure generally. So I think that is a quite different intervention is required at this point in time in 21st century. So if you look at the rural population versus the urban population, now roughly 8 billion people, and about 40% people still are rural. But then where do they reside? So they reside in a very few countries. You can see that the majority of the people in the world, the rural people live in across 5 or 6 different countries. So it is very important, very easy in a way to be able to work with those people, to be able to provide an alternative model for them to be able to harness their full potential. That's not necessarily to be, as I said, going to the complete urbanization cycle as we have been doing over the last many decades. So that is the significance of smart villages research. And we have been fortunate at the University of Melbourne to be able to get an international collaborator with some funding support to be able to actually understand that kind of research and set that settings to be able to work in a very particular context, which I'll talk shortly. And that is what our Smart Villages Lab is about. Our Smart Villages Lab hasn't come out of the blue. It has come with a very specific purpose, supported by a very particular agency. So essentially, the Smart Villages Lab, that is the entity that we have established to be able to create that sort of alternative model for smart development is to simply look at a few hypothetical positions. The current trend of urbanization is basically leaving rural communities behind. The increasing trend of our urban migration is overcrowding our cities. And by targeting the rural communities, we aim to stem the tide of the urban migration and promote the rural communities in their own lifestyle settings. So I think this picture is not quite required. So smart villages research is about a complete counter kind of policy drive against the rapid urbanization, which should support at least the 40% of the rural community in the world. So in our research, which is quite a new research in a way, last 4 years only we have been working on this particular in a problem. We have been focusing on the rural housing, rural infrastructure, rural economy, smart governance, and sustainability. So these are the broad 5 areas. So as you can see, it is very important that when you talk about the rural development, rural community, what it means, where do you start? It is about simply the smart solutions. It is about simply giving them more economic power, or what? I think that is not the only solution that we need to think. It's a much bigger proposition in terms of understanding those communities at large from the bottom up and making sure that we are working with them with their needs and the requirements, and making sure that they are happy in their own settings, and yet they become empowered over time. So that is where now I'll set the context now, where that particular program has started. And this program has started with a state in India, and that state is called Assam. I am originally from India, and that is where I had some connection. And so government of Assam, which is a state, one of the provinces in India, in northeastern part of India. So with about 35 million people, they had given us some support to actually do this research. So when we did that smart villages research from that funding body support, so we looked at 3 different dimensions to start with. Of course, that research component was very strong, but research is not the only thing that they are interested in. We have to somehow support their policies and capacity building through the research. So that is where we had 3 different dimensions in that particular program: building knowledge base as a research component, then of course building capacity, which is basically looking at more about the housing, building and development, more about construction side of the things, and then looking at the policy support. So these are the 3 areas that we have worked on in that particular project. Talking about the Assam, now I'm talking about more about this context-specific research. So that is where I already warned you that you may not have all the understanding about the work I'm going to present, but please bear with me. You can relate somehow in your own settings as well. So this is the left-hand side is the map of India, and right-hand side where that highlighted red block is the state of Assam. And Assam is surrounded by another 7 states, and that whole area is called 8 Sisters. And it is connected to the Bay of Bengal, and Bangladesh is just right behind. And India and the whole of 8 Sisters in the northeast are connected with a chicken neck, very small corridor. And then on the top of India, on the right-hand side, that big valley you can see is the valley of Himalaya. Above that is China and Myanmar and so on and so forth. So Assam is a place of 35 million people, and out of 35 million people, about 28 million people lives rural. They are rural community. So the problem, if you look at the scale of the problem, not only in India, not only in Assam, but India at large, India is India houses 1/7 of the world population. So we cannot simply ignore how India develops. It is very important because 1/7 of the population in India, in the world population residing in India, is a significant business for everyone. So in India, if you look at it, there are over 1.4 billion people, of course. 800 million people live in rural. And how do they live in rural? They live across 600,000 villages. So the rural people, they do not live by rural in slum areas alone. They have got a very particular setting. They live in their own villages. And these villages, as I said, every single village has got a very clear demarcation. They've got very clear characteristics. They've got very clear value and hereditary requirements. So these people live in a very clear settings, 600,000 villages. And in Assam, out of 35 million people, they live, 80% people live across 26,000 villages. So we got to understand those villages settings to start with in order to develop those rural people in the context that I'm talking about. And also, if you look at here, these are not only one group of people share the same language, same food, same culture, and so on. They may be Indian, but they have got different varieties of the faith, food, culture, language, and so on and so forth. In Assam alone, there are 300 plus dialects spoken across the 26,000 villages. And if you go from one point to the other, about 50 kilometers away, everything will change. They're same, as I said, they're Assamese people, they're Indian people, but their way of leading their life is quite different. So this is very important. And I'll come to that point in a minute with some very interesting idea that what it means if we simply apply our current body of knowledge, which is our urban body of knowledge or rural body of knowledge, in order to modernize those people, what can we get? And where is the knowledge gap? I'll just show you in a minute with some research-based data. So again, talking about Assam, Assam has got its own problem. It has got 29 different districts or provinces. And so Assam also receives quite a lot of rainfall, in a year, about 5,000 millimeter rain, because that is in the Valley of Himalaya. Monsoon goes over Bay of Bengal, hits into Valley of Himalaya, dumps about 500 millimeter rain every year. And Assam works as a catchment to get that water out to the Bay of Bengal. That's a natural phenomenon. So what is happening over time, and why I'm talking about the rainfall in Assam at the moment? Because I'll be talking more about the housing and the infrastructure side as well, because that is one of our areas of research, because I come from that background. And look at here, this is a common phenomenon in Assam today. So houses are being built in a way of modernizing people. And then during monsoon season, this is the state of affairs. People suffer from the inundation because the houses are built with brick and mortar in the catchment. So and people forgot about how the water in the upstream will go to downstream without having a proper catchment. And this is a phenomenon every year in Assam. And this is not a new phenomenon. Thousands of years, these things are happening. That much rain falls. World's largest rainfall intensity place is in Assam. It is called Cherrapunji. So it gets about 8,000 or 9,000 millimeter rain every year. That is the heritage site. But people forgot in their modernization spree how the nature can be preserved, or how to work with the nature through our scientific body of knowledge. So now talking about a few pictures here, you can see that Assam is right in the middle, left is our India, and then on the right hand side is that the catchment and the houses, and then bottom left you can see these are some of the vernacular houses that were exist in Assam, and they are still exist in some part of Assam today. So these vernacular houses built of local material, bamboo and basically timber, they're very good. They're highly sustainable houses, and they are naturally ventilated, and they are good for those catchment areas. So flood doesn't really affect them because they are on the stilt. But yet, on the left-hand side, you can see that India is now going in a big way developing the smart cities. And what Professor Phelps has mentioned about the smart cities and the data-driven approach, that really resonates quite well with some of the work that India is proposing at this moment. But my work here is slightly different from the mainstream smart city, which is smart villages. So what we have done over, I'll be brief. So this particular sponsored program that we have been working on, we have been able to produce some very interesting literature. So we have written 2 books and 1 policy support for the government of Assam. So the first book was simply about defining the smart village, followed by taking one of the very important stocks of smart villages is the housing. Then we talked about the housing as well in the context of smart villages. So then more work is in the pipeline. So our next book is happening at this moment is infrastructure for smart villages and so on. I think quite a few books are being planned. So it is very important that we understand the rural and the smartness, and then decipher all their various components as you go. So thinking about the smart villages generally, then I just wanted to quickly brief talk about what it means. So when you talk about the smart villages, it is not about simply smart housing solution or data-driven approach alone in terms of providing the smart solutions for the people, but also looking at the entire development sphere, looking at the housing, education, health, environment, access to the services, and job creation and security and so forth. So this is where basically we define that smart villages must address every single aspect together. And you can see here, every single bubble here will be a literature on its own right. And housing is one of the examples where I'll be talking about more about on the housing side shortly. This is the book that has come from one of the bubbles, that housing. And in that housing, again, we try to understand basically what it means in terms of the rural community and their housing. So then we found that the rural community and housing is not simply about the brick and mortar kind of construction or maybe vernacular construction with local material. It has got some more into that. So the local people, the way they live, the way they lead their life, it is very much defined by where they live. So their lifestyle, their way of leading life is very much linked to the housing. And many of the housing experts will agree on that. But that is what we try to actually understand in this context here. So then in terms of, so this is what some of the contents of that particular book. I don't want to go into much details, but I'll now talk about some of the housing patterns and what it means and how people actually, how by the type of the people, the way people lead their life, how that defines their houses. So vernacular architecture in rural housing is an important area to understand. And when we looked at some of the research very in depth, we found that the space of the house inside and outside, the orientation of the house, and the height of the house versus ceiling height inside, they are all defined by who are they and how they live and what is the lifestyle that they like to lead. So there is a value and hereditary characteristics embedded in every single house that these people live. And I'm talking about Assam at this moment, more than 300 different tribes in that 35 million people across 26,000 villages. And they are very fascinating story that we have been able to observe through our research. Then talking about the affordability, of course, there are other ways of looking at it. Cost is one aspect, but we also looked at the affordability here. Then I'll talk about the data-driven approach, which Professor Phelps also talked about, and I'll show you what we have done in terms of that data-driven approach and connecting the community in rural and with the policymakers. So it's very important then. What I'm trying to tell here is that the rural people, you cannot simply dump the solutions on them in terms of the modernization. It is very important that you try to understand them, you try to gather the information from them bottom up, and then work with the solution as they appreciate in their own settings. So that is where that data-driven research is very, very important. And that is where that smartness has come in. So smart cities and smart villages, whatever you call, that smartness is all about basically connecting the solutions with the community. And that is what the smart data is about. So what we have done as part of that particular program, so again, focusing on Assam, we have looked at a very particular area across 37 different villages and 2,500 households. We wanted to see exactly what are those people, what they want, and what do they have. So because we have already defined the smart villages model, and how can we incorporate that smart villages model into those communities in terms of their bottom-up requirements. So that is where we have created a custom-built data collection app And this is quite a substantial information that we try to collect. And this was an app basically running on the tablet. And we defined that we have used some volunteers. We have actually used those volunteers to go and knock on every single household and then start collecting their data in that app, which was actually collected at in Melbourne through the cloud-based storage. It was very smart way of collecting data, and this is the interface of that app. So we looked at one of the island areas. So this is the largest river island in Assam, in a wide river called Brahmaputra. So Majuli is the place, and Majuli, because of the hereditary status of that particular location, we have identified that, and we applied that app on those in that particular location across 37 villages, 2,300 households. So we collected data from housing to the demographic distributions to the energy usage to agriculture, skill levels, and so on and so forth. And then we were getting very interesting information here. And this video here, I'm going to show you just 2 minutes video. You just have a quick look. What is the proof of concept that we have built out of that data that we collected from that community here? So every single house that we collected the data from are geotagged, and every single house we have embedded in our system. That is the smart data platform that we created. And all the data that collected from every single house is being embedded at an individual level. But then there is a cross connection between the houses across the geographical boundaries, villages, blocks, districts, and the states. And then we could actually do lots of analytical information, analytics, just to be able to understand the patterns, the needs, and the recognition of the community, and so on and so forth. So you can see here, so every single person's, the kind of the house they live, the demographic distribution within the households, and the skill level, male versus female community, everything has been captured across the 2,300 households, which can then gives us a very powerful statistics in our fingertip. And that is what we have used to be able to plan the interventions that is required in a very localized settings. All right, so this is what a small proof of concept. Basically, we built a data-driven approach for rural development. And these are some of the statistics that we can draw instantly. And this data collection is not happening only in one point in time. It can be a very dynamic process. In India, the census data is collected every 10 years. And the moment they collect the data, they compile all the information in computer and start planning the interventions. And the moment they start rolling out those interventions, the 10 years is gone. So the new census time comes again, and the entire demography changes. So it is very important that we need to have a smart solution to be able to connect with those people and collect the real-time data so that our intervention is very specific and very targeted. Then, so we have looked at also the housing in a very deeper manner. So I'll just talk about simply some of the things happening in India today in the housing context. This is one of the central government's policy document where they talked about housing for all, especially targeting the rural community. And they have been trying to build the houses for the rural community with a top-down approach. So what is the problem here? Problem is that they have used the current body of knowledge, whether this is rural or urban body of knowledge, they applied that current body of knowledge to be able to develop the solutions for the rural. So what is happening here? You can see the example, the implication is phenomenal. So this particular document here called PEHEL has looked at every single state in Assam, state in India, and also very particularly in Assam as well. And they tried to understand what are the various models of the houses that can be built for the people in Assam. So 35 million people, as I said, 85% people lives in rural across 26,000 villages, and they have come up with 5 different housing models with the existing body of knowledge, and to impose those housing solutions into those rural communities. And then you see what is happening here. So these are the houses being built. So these houses are coming from that particular policy documentations given to the contractors. Finally, they are rolling out the policies and plans, and these are the houses being built in the rural. Look at these houses here. And this is just brick and mortar house, because these people have got no idea that the rural people need something different. So they all think about that, okay, modernizing of these people simply by brick and mortar is only way of modernizing those people. Okay, so that is where these houses are not meeting the targets or the expectations of the community. So then what we then looked at it here through one of my PhD students in the program, we actually went to some of those communal, the tribal areas, or rather, various tribes, as I said, in Assam. So we try to understand the 4 different tribes in Assam, and these tribes are called Kuki, Karbi, Dimasa, and Labang. So they are hilly tribes, and they live in these kind of houses. These are the real houses. And if you look at a glance, these houses are all same. They are all traditional material, very simple construction, and people build their own houses. They are all mostly on this tilt. So, but then when you look at in-depth understanding about their space planning, who lives in the houses, and how they segregate, inside and outside spaces of the houses, and how they perceive their space and their housing orientations, they're all different. So I don't want to go into too much details because this is not my main work. My PhD student has completed her PhD, and she is the one looked at these aspects. And these 4 different communities, you can see, this is the orientation and their space planning. And every single community, they are different. So then if you look at in a much detailed manner how various spaces are planned and perceived within these communities, they are all different. So then she has a comparison here. You see the Labang community, their houses are normally long houses. Dimasa houses are long or square, but in different zoning. And then Karbi houses are usually the wide houses, and Kuki houses are much more square houses with respect to the main street where the house is located. So that means when you do not, you now understand that, these people, perceive their house and space in a quite different way. So when we actually, for the sake of modernization, when we go and demolish these houses and build their, modernize their houses with brick and mortar, the way I have shown you with that particular policy that they rolled out, it is not going to really meet the purpose. Then some of the very interesting things in those villages are their vernacular skills. And this is this is a weaving machine, and a person is now weaving the the clothes using their punch card systems. And this punch card is very much handmade, and this is very important to understand. Our smart villages also needs the skill development and wealth creation as well. So if we do not understand the skills and the wealth potential of those people, we cannot simply design their houses. So this is one of the examples here. And you can see here, it's very ordinary kind of weaving machine, all timber and bamboo with the punch card, paper-based punch card. But what it produces here is something high value item. So these are the clothes that these weaving machines are producing. And these clothes in the marketplace today, in an international market even, they are valued $500 to $2,000 per set. These are usually the female clothes and very colorful local silk. And these are all coming from that sort of weaving machines. And these people are so highly skilled. So it is very important when you design a house or design a smart village, it is not only simply brick and mortar houses to modernize the people, but also look at their income earning potential. And we need to also understand basically what are the skills and the potential people have and how we can harness all these things together. So this is what basically, again, we highlighted as well. So I would not talk much about that. I think also this research is not, this is just the beginning. So what we are trying to do at this moment, we want to really grow this research in this area. It's a whole area of research that needed, and we need to develop a complete new, kind of literature in smart villages. It's an alternative way of developing the rural, so that even in our climate change kind of phenomena at this moment, the rural people, they live by the carbon neutral community, And this is very important that we also understand how these people can also contribute to our greenhouse for sustainable planet, for example. So this is very important as well. So what we are then doing here, an international conference was founded out of that project. We call as COSBIRD, and this conference is repeating, continuing every year. It become an yearly phenomenon, and we have done so far 3 conferences, and one this year is about to be held in December next month. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for Dr. Hemanta Duloi for your sharing. I will continue to the third speaker. Before that, I'll inform to all of you that the question and answer session will be held in the end of the session or after the presentation of our 5th speaker. Yep. So if you have any question, please text in the chat. The third speaker is Dr. Raghu Dharmapuri Tirumala. Dr. Raghu is a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Architecture, Building and Planning at the University of Melbourne. Raghu's research focuses on infrastructure, project and property finance, and managing the transformation of cities. He holds a PhD in Built Environment, MBA in Marketing and Finance, and Bachelor of Technology in Mechanical Engineering. Previously, as the professor and director at RICS School of Built Environment, Noida, India, Raghu had set up the School of Infrastructure and designed the MBA program in Infrastructure Management. Prior to that, he was the CEO of Infrastructure Development Corporation, Karnataka Limited, a joint venture of the Government of Karnataka, IDFC, and HDFC at Bangalore, India. At this seminar, he will present about the Smart City Program of India. Dr. Raghu, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Ibu Uli. It's a wonderful introduction, and thank you everyone for inviting me to this program. I'm not going to the details of what is a smart city, and that I think Nick and others have spoken about. Let me start sharing my screen. What I will try and do is to look at the process of what the smart city program happened in India. Unfortunately, I can't see any of you, so you have to pardon me with my visuals and my video, but let me go to the presentation. I'm happy to take the questions at the end. The process of smart city, as you are noticed by now, varies across the geographies, varies across the locations what we are speaking about. Hemanta was kind enough to give a great introduction about India, spoke about what it entails, what it doesn't entail. As a country, it's quite large. In the sheer area, it's 1/3 of China and USA, but the population is almost touching China. And the population is touching China's population and almost 4 times the population of USA. As Hemanta mentioned, the share of urban and rural has been changing quite differently. So the urban share has increased from 25% sometime back, about 20 years, now is about 33%, is expected to accelerate further. According to McKinsey Global Institute, India is building equivalent to 1 Chicago every year. That's a kind of urbanization what is happening in the country. We have 42 cities, the population in excess of 1 million, likely to cross 68 in another decade or so. Europe has only 35 today. So the entire population, the urbanization is changing quite rapidly. If you're actually monitoring the growth in the South Asia and Southeast Asian countries, the future is going to belong to Indonesia, India, and China. These are the 3 countries who are going to dominate as far as the population goes, the opportunity goes, and the systems, processes, money, finances, everything come into that. So increasingly the attention is on these 3 countries in China. And I mean, for instance, even Australian universities and Australian government have specific strategies for these respective countries. So this is a system which is there, and like any other place, you have the quality of infrastructure in India has been quite bad over the period. I've taken all these slides and material from various Government of India documents. I'm just adding a little bit of commentary on my own, but I'm happy to share this presentation at the end of the talk today. So the situation of urban services is quite bad and it's been deteriorating. And this is a kind of a context when people started looking at why we need a smart city or why we need a different intervention to improve the quality of life. I'm sure some of you will relate to these kind of images. I've traveled to Indonesia a few times, last year to Jakarta, but I can reasonably say that go to any Southeast Asian country or a South Asian country, the situation is quite similar. As the urbanization is increasing, the probability of challenges have increased quite a lot. How do we transform from this kind of state of affairs to what we have been talking about as smart? And all the images, what we see about smart, except what Hemanta has very rightly pointed out, so is of glass, brick and mortar, a lot of technology, etc. And the debate which we had in the morning is smart means technology or smart means clever or way of doing things. So, I mean, staying away from the debate of what is smart, Government of India has taken different steps to ensure that some of the places in the country have become smart. Like now, when I say some of the places, it's not the entire country, it's not the entire city. I'll show that in a minute or so now. So their program of smart cities, I'm going to talk about that only, but that doesn't mean it means only a portion of the city. All these things which have happened over a period, while in the presentation it looks nice and very structured and organized, the on-the-ground events doesn't work like that. Particularly at a master's level, when we are studying programs, we should understand what's happening on the ground. Does it exactly follow the theory, or does it follow a process which is there and the theory needs to align towards the impact? Now that's the challenge India faced. When we started looking at a smart city project, it's a project of say waste management or providing housing or providing a good transport solution. These are all individual projects. So we bring in a technology for an individual project and try and implement that. What we call space, having an idea and actually doing a project, there's a substantial difference between the two. The efforts are so huge. We call it a giant leap of faith. You have to take your idea and actually see that on the ground. Needs a lots of effort in terms of human resources, planning, finances, systems and processes, monitoring, stakeholder buy-in. So many elements are there. So my presentation is going to touch on those elements rather than the technology side of it. Doing one project involves so much of effort, but how do you do it for 100 cities across the country? It's a different layer of complexity involved, different layer of activities which are there. So that's the kind of experience of Smart City Mission of India. I'm not saying this is the only way to do it. I'm not again saying that this is the exactly correct way of doing it. They had gone through their own challenges. They had gone through their own troubles in getting this program going. There are a lot of criticism on what is happening on the ground. But essentially, it helps us to understand how the process gets done from a greater country perspective and see if any improvements can be made over a period. So the MOHUA is the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs at Government of India. They've created a program called Smart City Mission, on that, which is showing in this pyramid, the top 100. I'll come to that in a second, but that 100 won't solve the problem of India. As you're seeing, the country is quite large. We have 5,000 plus cities, what is called as urban local body in India. So with such a large number of cities, and you do touch a minuscule portion of smart city, is not going to change the country. So what does the government do? So they went at a 3-layered activity. As I said, again, it is not by design. It so happened today in the presentation looks like a 3-layered, but all the programs started kind of contemporaneously. The lowest level, which addresses most of the activities, most of the cities, are under poverty alleviation and urban affordable housing. So what they call a Amrut program. That's at the lowest level. Then the next layer of 500 cities, the next bigger level, they focused on water supply and sewerage, which is going on currently. The top 100 is what they thought they will go for a smart city program. So the vision today presented is like this. So in 2015, June, Government of India formally launched a smart city program. They announced its name with a high fanfare. I was there present in that particular room when they actually did, like what 15, 20,000 people attended in a big conference hall. And they spoke about what their vision of smart cities is and what can happen. From a perspective, it looks very uncooked. I mean, what do you call, not thought through completely. So many issues are there. But I guess that's how the reality will look like on the ground, because you do a program of that nature, obviously there'll be many challenges, and you can't keep thinking and planning. You have to get down to the ground and then start implementing and then see what will happen, and you have to learn on the way. So that's what they have tried to do. So this smart city program of India, the implementation elements of it, how do you actually implement it? Idea is good. You want to convert one particular city or a portion of a city into a smart element. But to do that process, what does it take? The first thing they said is that every city will need to have what is termed as a SPV, a special purpose vehicle, or a governing body. It's like a board of a company. If you take any company in a world, say Apple or a Microsoft or a Rio Tinto or any other name, you have a management. Cities are governed by municipal corporations, who has a mayor, who has a commissioner, etc. But smart city has to be run more like a corporate style. It can't be a government style, because this, if you do the same way you have been doing for hundreds of years, you can't expect changes. So you have to do it slightly differently. So they said we will have a special purpose vehicle, a entity which will look like a corporate board, who will run the city. Now, the details are quite interesting. They have put the same people there. Like, can I have same person who's called a commissioner to a CEO? Will he change his nature? So that's a debate for some other day. But essentially, the intent is to change the running of a smart city from being a government run to more like a corporate run. That's one element. The second element of doing a project is always finances. How do you actually find the money to do a project? If you are improving from current level, now Jakarta has a waste management facility or a big landfill. You want to convert that into a very strong modern waste to energy plant. It's going to take a lot of money. Who is going to pay for it? So that those issues need to be debated. So what Government of India has said is that they went on what is known as a 50-50 funding pattern. They said central government, the national government is going to pay 50% of the cost with a ceiling, and the state government is going to pay the rest of the money with some ceiling again. Whatever money is still left over will be raised from private sector and other external and internal funding resources. So that's a mechanism which they said they will approach. The Smart City Mission strategy is actually into 3 different pillars. So think of a city like a, I mean, I'm in Indonesia, but like I've been to Jakarta, so let's say equivalent to Jakarta. You have a big area like this. You can't do the complete city at one shot as a smart city. That's not the intention of Smart City Mission in India. What they're saying is that in this large city, there could be 3 different buckets. One bucket is focused on renewal. So that is where the redevelopment project will happen. Means whatever is actually there, it can be rehabilitated. The infrastructure can be rehabilitated. The buildings can be rehabilitated and then do some activity. So they called it a redevelopment project. And they've given some kind of area demarcations for that. The second bucket is on the retrofitting. You go back and do the city improvement, local area planning, water supply projects, retrofitting, more greenfield, completely fresh development. So they allowed saying that a greenfield project with a certain area limitations, which typically in cities will be city extensions and satellite towns. The rest of the city will be redevelopment or retrofitting. So essentially the project now, the Smart City Mission, suddenly has transformed from a technology or a process oriented, you start talking about land a lot. So redevelopment, retrofitting, greenlead, it suddenly becomes a land and area based development. And some improvements in the particular area, the greenfield, let's say 250 acres or 100 acres, some area, and the rest of the activities can probably go through PAN City. For instance, if you want to build a smart building, a smart complex with everything in an area which is completely greenfield, 100 acres, that is categorized as an area-based development. But suppose we improve the water supply or we improve the waste management, the impact is going to go beyond this greenfield to the entire city. Hence, they called it a pan city. So the discourse and the dialogue started moving from technology to land and area and different discussions. Obviously, smart solutions have to be put in. So government has prescribed certain mechanisms, certain electronic service delivery, intelligent traffic systems, etc. And so on. I'll show you a few evidence of what they have done. So this is the strategy which is there. So obviously, there are certain restraints and you have to have some trade-offs. Government of India wanted to do certain number of cities. They can't do for every city, 5,000 plus cities. Probably over the long period they might want to do, but they want to start off with a few cities. Now, how do you go about doing that? They went on a selection process of choosing the cities. How do you choose the top 100 cities? So what they've done, they went on a two-stage competitive process to select a city. The first stage is an intra-state city selection. India has about 80 states. Each state will have 20, 30 odd, depending upon the magnitude of different cities. So they went on an initial competition to shortlist. The state did the competition to figure out their own cities. Now these cities entered the national competition to see who will get selected. So they went through 4 different rounds of selection. They reached a target of 100 cities. They started off with 90, then they added a few. Surprisingly, Bangalore got knocked off as a city initially. Bangalore is known as the IT capital of India. And that's where a lot of technology happens, but it didn't figure in the first round of the cities. And of course, that led to a lot of debate in the public. Actually, the process itself is right. But anyway, due to either political pressure or just the sheer public pressure, Bangalore got in ultimately into the smart city competition and the selected as one of the smart cities. So the diversity, Hemanta spoke a lot. India, Indonesia also, different cities, different people, different population, different languages. So everything is different. So the 100 smart cities that way are not uniform. They're quite different, ranging from very small to very large. Different, and they'll come out with a wish list of what projects they want to do, and they started doing it. So selection is one way, idea is one way. The government has given some mechanism. Then what happens after a city gets selected? So government said that there are 4 or 5 different milestones you need to follow. Now this is a work in process. It will go on for some time. This slide is to get the projects on the ground. One, of course, as I said, you have to establish a SPV. So that has to happen in the first 3 months of the smart city getting selected. So most of the entities have done. I'll show you the progress in a second. After getting a SPV, someone has to physically do the project. So you need to have a project management company. It can be a contractor. So a lot of consulting firms like the big 4 agencies and equivalent consulting firms today are the PMCs for various smart cities. So they have to be appointed, which is a next milestone, who will try and do the project feasibility work, the DPR preparation, project design, tendering. So that activity is the milestone 3, which the time period given was about 8 to 12 months. Obviously, everyone is not going at the same pace, but that's the activity which is the number 3. Then, of course, once the tendering happens, you have to issue the work order and start the construction and project completion. So these are the various elements. Now, this looks a typical construction management kind of a flow chart, but ultimately the project gets down to these, and the elements of smart will have to be incorporated into your conventional way of constructing activities. So while the idea is there, the basics of whatever we are learning, be it urban planning, construction management, property, everything will remain. This basically gives one of a snapshot of how the human resources and institutions in smart cities have progressed. Obviously, we'll start off with a smaller base and they just pick up, and there is a growth phase. There's a steep ramp up when government started pushing cities to build up their SPVs, identify the PMCs, and then start doing the work. And it is kind of plateauing when everyone has reached the targets here. And if you take the same diagram for the money spent or the projects implemented, the profile will look more or less similar. So it took roughly 4 or 5 years from 2015 when the launch, today where we are in, to set up all the SPVs and all the PMCs and work which is happening. Most of the cities have come with a quite small in the initial ages. Now that's a challenge for the planners and the city managers. Can you make a change if you think small in a smart city project, or do you need to do a very large project to make a difference? No, there's no easy answer, and both have to coexist. It can't be one over the other. But having said that, it's always easy for small projects to kick off the ground. So that's the evidence which again India had. You see the size of the bubble increases, indicates the size of the project. Initially, there were a lot of small projects. Only towards the later half, you started to see larger projects, which probably has a better impact in terms of the coverage. So that's one of the learning. Now, how do you go about when you plan for a city? You have to see how the efficiency happens. And look at the investments, what has happened over the period. Again, we expect that a lot of work would have happened in solid waste, water, etc. But most of the experience today is on the area development. That was the focus. From day one, as I said, the discourse seems to land rather than infrastructure. So you find a lot of projects on the area development side. Transport has picked up quite a lot. The urban mobility, the economic development, the IT connectivity, energy. Housing is somewhere halfway through. Water supply, the conventional economic infrastructure, kind of which has done so again, this is a point of note, and we need to debate and probably do some research further on this. So will a smart city actually encourage economic infrastructure, or is it going to encourage the ancillary and the support infrastructure for doing projects? Again, the time frame, I'm sure, is very short to come to any conclusions. Once the implementation happens and the experience is studied in multiple countries, we'll be able to talk something about it. But the Indian experience in the first 5 years seems to be indicating that the economic infrastructure has taken a backseat. The progress as of November looks like this. Again, this, as I said, I've taken from the Government of India documents. Obviously, there's a lot of debate and discourse saying that these numbers may not be accurate to the last digit. There could be some debate, and the quality and the efficiency is not being depicted in the slides what I'm showing. So, but having said that, the country probably has moved on from an idea to getting the projects on the ground. Now the question of how do we implement that, and then how do you ensure that the benefits reach the citizens? So let me show you a few pictures on what actually happened on the projects which are on the ground. Urban mobility is one of the roads in the eastern part of the country. They have changed quite a lot on these things. Public bicycle sharing program, particularly for the girl child, has been picking up across the country, and a lot of cities have gone that direction. As I said, transportation is one of the elements. A lot of e-vehicles and e-mobility has picked up under the gamut of smart cities. Smart water, and India, like Indonesia, have some challenges in getting water. So like an ATM, they started creating water ATMs equivalent. So there's a systems where you can just go into a ATM and then draw water, particularly useful in the summer season. So this is one of the activities. Sanitation, of course, went on a different direction, largely supported by foundations and other NGOs who push quite hard on sanitation. So that activities which happened. This, you are familiar with integrated command and control centers. So every SPV has this. Looks extremely flashy, looks like a Hollywood movie, but have been put to good use in the COVID times. The command control centers were very, very useful in terms of identifying where the outbreaks were, how to control. So they use the smart city program towards that direction. I mean, every city today has something like this, and this is where the bulk of the technology had come in. Then you had the transport on the mass transport level, public transport, not necessarily the intermediate public transport, but the mass transport except. These smart ideas have been taken into classrooms and campuses in certain cities, not across the country, but yeah, this is happening in a few places. India has a large amount of religious activities which go on, and this is one of the events which has happened, and that's where crowd management becomes extremely critical. And again, they use these technologies combined with the command center to control the crowds, and they did quite well. So this is what they happened so far. The move is towards the outcomes. So a lot of research articles, government publications are happening. People are thinking about was it right, wrong, or what actually is happening. There are some attempts to call out the data and technology initiatives in the overall smart city program, but increasingly we think data and technology is one element, but essentially the rest of the city life, the rest of the management side of the program, the human resources, the finances, etc., are becoming very, very critical and very, very important. To these slides, having looked at all these things, do we really think that smart city mission is on the course of transforming India? Now the jury is out there, so the answer is both yes and no. No, because it's benefiting a very, very small percentage of the Indian population. As I said, it's a part of a city. It's not even a full city. So out of 5,000 cities, you're looking at 100 cities, and even in the 100 cities, only a portion. So it's going to be a very small portion. So is it really transforming the complete country? Then probably no. Effort for everything. So, and then the total outlay which has been put in, some of it is given by the government, but where do you raise the rest of the money is becoming a big challenge, and there's no easy answers for it. Yes, in some sense, it is also transforming because the cities have started thinking seriously about what services they need to provide, what kind of engagement they need to have with their citizens. So a lot of WhatsApp-based, mobile-based voting, public communication has happened, planning has happened with the citizen participations, which is a good idea. But there are some critics who say that the democratic decentralization process has been severely impacted, which again is a point for debate. As I said, the financial state is a concern for everyone. So the city suddenly says that I need like so many crores of, so many thousands of dollars of money, but where do you pay and how do you pay it back? No one has thought about these issues. So it's a kind of a work in progress. 5 years down the line, obviously lessons are being learned. You can still change the transform the cities program from where it is there and where it is going on. So probably one size doesn't fit all, and that's what everyone speaks about infrastructure and planning spaces. So we need to work solutions which are very customized and very localized. Now the debate is going on saying that don't call it a smart cities, call it a sustainable cities program. There is some merit in that particular argument too. Resources need not be tied only to ULBs, it has to be tied to various activities. So essentially a lot of activities can get done, take away the focus from land, get into more outcomes equivalent, get into comprehensive municipal finance and the governance activities. So these kind of debates are happening. So this is where the country is heading. So I'll stop here and happy to take questions when the time comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Dr. Raghu. I will continue to the fourth speaker, our fourth speaker. The fourth speaker is Dr. Julie Miao. Dr. Julie Miao is an Australian Research Council Discovery Research Fellow and Associate Professor in Property and Economic Development at the University of Melbourne. She also holds honorary position at Shanghai Jiaotong and Henan Universities, China. Dr. Miao studied economy, geography, and planning at the University College London. Her research has been developed along two innovative fields on the entrepreneurial state and innovation space, which explore the interfaces between planning, property, governance, innovation, and the knowledge economy. She has published widely on the themes and conducted research funded by the Australian Research Council, UK Economic and Social Research Council, the British Academy, the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and the Victorian Government in Australia. The intersection between the two in particular has been explored by Dr. Miao from multidisciplinary approaches with several impactful research outcomes. Among others, her publications include Making 21st Century Knowledge Complexes with Routledge and the Varieties of Urban Entrepreneurialism in the Dialogue in Human Geography. On this section, Dr. Miao will present about the Smart City Initiative in Melbourne. Would you please, Dr. Miao?
Yes. So, okay, let me see whether I can. Okay, great. So, thank you very much for the long introduction. And thank you again for organizing this timely seminar. The topic is very interesting. So my talk today is to share the Smart City initiative in Melbourne. What I'm going to cover are two kind of bigger areas. First is the various initiatives launched by the city so far. And I want to introduce kind of a further thought on how smart cities are responding to a COVID environment or COVID safe environment. Perhaps a good place to start my talk is to place Melbourne within the international ranking of smart cities. Of course, there are various indicators and ranking metrics we can draw upon to compare Melbourne with others. Unfortunately, Melbourne hasn't been able to make the top 10 smart city ranking in various index, except for the smart city governance score. This is in a sharp contrast to its kind of livability ranking, which has always been kind of ranked really high internationally. Also compared to other international cities, what we know, what we can see is that the smart city terminology was actually used in Melbourne relatively late. And also there's not a very long-term strategic plan that supports smart city initiative. So set against this background, let's look at the specific smart city initiatives launched by the city so far. I will organize my talk against the following 4 general features that are shared by many of the successful smart cities across the world, many of which actually has been touched upon by previous speakers. So rule number 1, it is generally noticed that smart city strategies tend to work better when we have a locally based and a place-specific approach. Here, Clement and Cruzen, for example, noted that there are various challenges and problems faced by a particular city or local area. And a smart city technology or smart city solution tend to be adopted and implemented more effectively when these problems could be better matched against the smart city technologies. And it is also when a favorable political context is in place to support their adoption. I think like the speaker, like Nick actually mentioned earlier on about the contrast between the global north and south, and also about the difference between urban and village in how they adapt smart city technology has also speak to this point. And this is actually what Melbourne has done reasonably well. Let's look at Melbourne practice. So the Smart City Initiative in Melbourne falls within the domain of the City Council. The state of Victoria hasn't been directly involved in any smart city projects or initiatives so far, except for providing strategic funding towards major infrastructures that's underpinning the smart city initiative. This is the same with the Commonwealth government, so they don't kind of lead a specific project per se. And within Melbourne City Council, what we can notice is that there is actually no written formal smart city strategy. Instead, smart city was established in a portfolio, or you could say an area of responsibility in the City Council. So this arrangement gives the City Council both the flexibility, but also the authority to kind of cherry pick what particular smart city project they would like to pursue, emit their policy objective. So far, there are 8 smart city initiatives being supported by the City Council. If we look through these 8 initiatives, they roughly fall into 3 general areas. The first one is to leverage and mobilize a human capital to further explore the smart city potentials. This actually works quite well with the strengths of Melbourne as a multicultural metropolitan city. And second general initiative is around data and open data. And actually many cities around the world are doing similar things. And the third one is around mobility and experience of both its citizens as well as visitors. Again, this works with the profile of Melbourne as the most livable city and also as one of the most popular tourist destinations in Australia. So what we see here is that there's no general smart city policy per se. Rather, Melbourne City Council focused on a set of topics when developing the policy that supports its local policy objectives. So that's really a good practice. Then the second general feature shared by successful smart cities, a fit for purpose initialization pathway. Dorsos and colleagues, for example, noticed 3 deliberate pathways to initialize a smart city, including, first of all, creating a brand new smart city. Second is to launch smart city projects. And the last one is to use smart technologies in retrofitting city's fabric. And if we look at the Melbourne practice, it generally follows the second approach, that is focusing on smart city projects. So it's very kind of bit by bit approach. Also, what I see is that the smart city practice in Melbourne doesn't emerging from vaccine. Instead, there is a certain level of pace dependency, because like many other scholars also noticed that Melbourne's smart city strategy is actually a rebranding of its knowledge city policy, which could be dated back to early 2000s. It used smart city because this terminology could support its current policy priorities. And I quote here, our vision for Melbourne as a smart city is to enhance aspects of a city that make us uniquely Melbourne. And how they interpret smart city is that they want to adopting the useful innovation that falls seamlessly into how we live our lives to improve our day-to-day experience. So clearly we can see that the policymaker is very clear on what policy goals they want to achieve, and they choose these technologies and projects that meet their policy objectives. But with this rebranding, a question emerging that is there a change of focus as well? Because early on, when we talk about knowledge city, the focus tends to be broader on education, on human capital, on kind of supporting general skill improvement. But when it moved to smart city, the idea has kind of pretty much shifted towards techie-driven new technologies. So I think that's kind of response to what Nick mentioned early on about the quick and slow approach in how we plan and thinking of our city. And the third feature here is using a system of systems development framework. So when the smart village talk was given, I think, oh, that's actually a great example to demonstrate the system approach here. So within the internal system of smart city, we could at least say it contains of economic, social, environmental, and governance system. And the system of smart city as an overarching framework, its function is to sustain and to balance the different practice and priorities of the different domains, if you say. Then how does Melbourne perform on this regard? Unfortunately, not very well. So here I borrow the index from each cantor and colleagues. They use 16 index to try to capture the system function of smart city in all the major local council areas of Australia. So within Victoria, we can see that all the local council area for within the Great Metropolitan Melbourne actually could be regarded as leaders in smart city practice. However, Melbourne City Council was ranked 8th within Victoria and 44th across all the major local council areas. So it's given, that's quite a shocking result if you think about the population base and the economic base of Melbourne City. In particular, what the researchers found is that Melbourne falls particularly short in terms of its housing, its equity indicator, and its health and labor force indicator. So as we can see, that Melbourne is actually not doing very well in terms of using smart technology to prove social equity among its citizens. So that's a major shortage of Melbourne as a smart city. Then the last one is to adopt an input, process, output, and an impact evaluation model. And this different process also form a feedback loop. Or in more details, you can say that the evaluation process starts from input towards activities, output, outcome, and visions. But actually, based on my study together with my co-author, Matt, we found that in practice, quite a lot of local government actually use this evaluation framework the other way around. They normally start with the visions and political goals they want to achieve. Then they work backwards, try to identify what are the outcomes they have to achieve, and then work with the resources, input they have in their hand. So it takes time to have this thinking process. Again, goes to Nick's idea about thinking, taking time to plan our cities better. And this area is a major shortcomings of Melbourne as a smart city. Based on my interview with a smart city officer in Melbourne, I was told that they are seriously understaffed and the resources to conduct any kind of long-term strategic thinking about smart city, let alone conducting any systematic evaluation and monitoring of their practice. The major planning framework in Melbourne is so-called Plan Melbourne 2013-2015. It's a cross-metropolitan Melbourne planning strategy, which try to manage Melbourne's growth and change over the next 3 decades. And this planning framework actually has a very systematic monitoring and a review mechanism in place. So a formal review process is supposed to be conducted every 5 years. However, when I look through the over 100 very concrete deliverables in support of this policy outcome, I can only see 2 specific actions that's related to smart city initiative. So that again shows the limited effort Melbourne has been put into evaluating and monitoring its smart city activity. So I think I will quickly touch upon how smart city is reacting to a COVID environment. As I mentioned early on, Melbourne is actually understaffed and resource shortage in implementing its smart city strategy. This also partially reflected in how the local council is reacting to COVID impact, and also perhaps underpinning its relatively low kind of ranking on the global smart city system. Here, my analysis of smart city and COVID environment is mainly drawn upon a report done by KPMG. This report divides smart city infrastructure into 6 layers. So the first layer is smart physical infrastructure. Because the COVID really constrained people's long-term travel possibility. So it makes the shape and accessibility of public space emerging very prominently. Here, Melbourne is actually performing relatively well. It has a quite widely spread public space, green space available, but it is not because of its smart city initiative. It's mainly thanks to its long-term commitment of planning kind of department towards providing public open space to its citizens. And the second layer is on sensor and devices. Basically, the impact of COVID has kind of stimulated a major public investment on Internet of Things. Here, a good example is Service Victoria, as I show on the picture here. So it's a kind of government app. You can use it for multiple purposes, like save your vaccine record, check in different venues, and keep a record of where you have been to. So when one place is identified as a hotspot, you will get noticed immediately. Then the third layer is communication and connectivities. COVID again just made it so clear that connectivity is crucial for society and for resilience of our city. Just over 1 month, the subscription to NBN in Australia increased by 30 to 80% in March 2019 compared to February. However, I think Australia in general suffers limitation here. Its internet connection, broadband is not very well developed, especially in regional Australia. And also the cost for internet is pretty high. So a lot of vulnerable or low-income families actually suffer quite a lot in this regard. And the fourth layer is security and priority. This is, I think, quite straightforward. When you're sharing data, using kind of this platform so often, you want to be guaranteed that your personal information is safely kind of stored. Here, a good example is the COVID Safe app developed by Australian government, Commonwealth government. So it very clearly has a note here to ensure users that your identity is and personal information is safeguarded. Because this app allows you to kind of share your close contact, so that the government can kind of notice you when one of your close contacts has COVID. Then the fifth layer is on data and data integration. So we have talked about this a lot. Big data kind of provide kind of the information needed to make decisions and to respond to COVID in a timely manner. Here, Victoria again is leading in this regard. I think within a few months into COVID, Victoria's Department of Health and Human Services has released an interactive kind of platform where it combines various data streams to provide, like, give you a snapshot of the current impact of COVID in Victoria, and that breaking down into like people's ages, gender, and your location, and it's updated kind of real time. So that's really good kind of information giving to citizens. And the last platform is various applications and the interfaces. I think the COVID just make it clear that real power lies in community, and the community needs support to build social interaction as well, especially in when physical contact is getting constrained. So how to further encourage people to use these different kind of apps, platform to build their social connection has become really important in COVID and post-COVID environment. So I'd like to end my presentation with the three kind of general recommendations made by KPMG. First one is to think the pandemic as an opportunity. It can give smart city a further boost and also give cities the kind of the drive to use smart city better to steer their city transformation. Secondly is that digital connectivity is key, both in COVID and post-COVID. And the last general lesson is that COVID gave additional weight to learning and connectivity and community building. So that will support us into building our future resilience across the world. So I will finish here, and thank you again for your time, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Julie Miao. And then the last speaker was Dr. Amanda Ahmadi. Amanda Ahmadi is a senior lecturer in architectural design, Asian architecture and urbanism at the University of Melbourne. She obtained a Bachelor of Degree in Architecture in 1998 at Parahyangan University, Indonesia, and a doctorate degree in Architecture and Asian Studies in 2008 at the University of Melbourne. Ahmadi's main teaching areas are architectural history, theory and design with a regional focus on the global south. Among her publications are articles in Journal of Southeast Asian Architecture, publication, ABA Journal, Architecture Beyond Europe, and book chapter in Sir Bannister Fletcher's Global History of Architecture, published by Bloomsbury 2019. The Past in the Present, Architecture in Indonesia, published by the Netherlands Architecture Institute and KATLV 2007, and in Architecture and Identity, published by Lit Verlag, Berlin 2008. Her recent and current research project explore topics such as historical cosmopolitan urbanism and identity politics in colonial and post-colonial Indonesia, photographic framing of 19th century architecture of Indonesia, and the politics of urban spectacle and informality in Southeast Asian cities. She's one of the founding members of the SAUH Asia, the Society of Architectural and Urban Historian of Asia, and an active member of INFUR, Informal Urbanism Research Group, and HUCH, the Australian Centre for Architectural History, Urban and Cultural Heritage. On this session, Dr. Amanda Ahmadi will present about kampungization of Indonesian cities. Dr. Amanda, this segment is yours, please.
Thank you, Uli. Terima kasih for the very generous introduction. Let me just share my presentation. Okay, and thank you for this opportunity to join this panel, this session this afternoon in Melbourne. And I'm so enjoying learning from my colleague here in Melbourne, because we haven't seen each other for 18 months. We're slowly returning, emerging out of the lockdown, Melbourne being the capital of lockdown in the world. So yes, thank you. And I would like to also build on some of the key points that my colleague have explored in their presentation. And I think my presentation, it's sort of highlighting another facet of smart urbanism, or sort of an argument of how we can frame smart urbanism that are contextualized and localized, and kind of recognizing informal urbanism or kampung culture in Indonesia as a kind of social capital, already existing capacity and mode of urban production that has been proven through history as being crucial in the functioning of cities in Indonesia. And I think my presentation will consist of two parts. The first part is a reflection of the role of the kampung through the pandemic in Indonesia. And then the second part is a reflection of the traveling studio that we undertook in the last 5 years, collaborating as well with our colleague at ITB, which particularly looking at informal urbanism and the dynamic of kampung. I might just want to define what kampung means. I think all of my friends in Indonesia know that well, but sometimes we sort of stereotype kampung so much we forgot the history of kampung. Kampung is a terminology used to describe densely populated neighborhood where buildings tends to be self-constructed, self-built, and it tends to be located in an urban center. Although historically, kampung is used generally to also describe village, sort of a rural settlements. But through time, that word has incorporated additional meaning to describe this condition, this urban condition that are not quite rural, but not also urban, sort of this in-betweenness that allow for flexibility, adaptability. It's an element of Indonesian cities that somehow have that capacity to evolve and transform through time, to some extent compensating the formal city, the formal development of cities. And okay, so as part of my introduction, some of my research work, I've been wearing a lot of hats as an academic. I'm an architecture historian and I'm a designer, but also I'm an urban researcher. And I think to some extent it highlights the multidimensional, the interdisciplinary nature of built environments in Indonesia, a context where I am undertaking my research. And these are the type of readings that constantly featured in my research and my teaching to kind of remind ourselves of the conditions of the global South, and that we should, constantly remind ourselves of the particular characteristic, the particular urbanism, our history, and to somehow incorporate that understanding as this professional awareness of built environments, may they be urban planning, urban design, or architecture, sort of subscribe to the canon of the discipline. This idea to kind of constantly occupy the two space, the space of knowledge, this universal idea of the discipline, and the complexities of the actual condition of built environments. Just to build on what Nick has earlier mentioned, I would also like to point it out that it's very important to historicize our understanding of urban forms in Indonesia. And it is quite problematic to assume that kampung or informal as something that is a contemporary phenomenon, when in fact it predates the existence of the formal city. It becomes informal, it is termed as informal by the formal cities. And this is one of the old map of Batavia. And problematically, the kampung area is colored green, suggesting that as if it's just a landscape surrounding the European settlement. In fact, that it's actually an extensive area of built environments, of settlements built by the people. And this is a map of Bandung, again, similar to what happened in Batavia, but this is perhaps more problematic because it is a map of Bandung in the early 20th centuries, and those areas colored as green are the kampung. And if you see on the lower left side, it is colored green, but in fact it is kampung, those neighborhood, self-built neighborhood, self-governed settlements that coexist with the European settlement. And this is a bird-eye view of Bandung in 1930s. You can see the coexistence of the European urban neighborhood and the kampung. There is an evidence in Jalan Braga, most of you probably know where, the Apandi alley, that sort of suggests that the Kampung Braga behind Jalan Braga already exists before Braga itself, the streetscape, the most famous colonial streetscape of the city, were built. So I think this coexistence sort of led into kind of sort of transformed into a kind of dichotomy in 20th century Indonesia because of the discourse of development, this idea of development being moving forward and producing something new. And this is something that the topic, the dichotomy that we try to critically analyze, unpack, and challenge in a couple of studios program that we have undertaken with ITB. Now, I just want to kind of shift into this coexistence, heightened coexistence between the kampung and the city through the pandemic that really highlight the capacity of the kampung to support the functioning of the city, more crucially even during the pandemic. And this is sort of like a joke, a meme that Indonesians love to circulate. Indonesians love to laugh about themselves, even in the most dire situation. And again, that reflects that kampung spirit, this social trait of informality, flexibility, and solidarity, even in the most dire situation. This is sort of happening to describe how, you know, Indonesia continued to peak while the rest of, in terms of the number of infection, while the rest of Southeast Asia already managed to, you know, move beyond the peak. And but I think what we need to refeel is the fact that for some reason there is a level of optimism circulated through social media among the Indonesian middle class that somehow life continued to unfold. And then despite, or maybe because of the looseness of governance through the pandemic, and because of that crucial interdependence between the formal and informality. And of course, for the kampung settlements, it is impossible to not operating on the street because they depend on their livelihood occurring on the street. So they couldn't possibly comply to PSBB and so on. And they can't possibly, you know, social distance in such a dense environment. But, you know, this disobedience also happened among the middle and upper class, you know, when it was not you're encouraged not to go mudik, you know, exodus to your hometown. Yeah, people actually come up with this app, you know, how to safely commute from, you know, the major cities to your hometown. So I want to kind of point it out to this hidden smart urbanism already exists in Indonesian cities. It's not something to I guess, to undermine the definition and the aspiration toward smart cities through technology, improvement of infrastructure, but simply to kind of remind ourselves of the existing capacity that should not be taken for granted, given that it has been proven to be essential. And I want to highlight these instances of solidarity between classes that emerged through the pandemic and the spatial tactic, some element of spatial tactic that can be seen through the last 2 years, emerging from the coexistence between the city and the kampung in Indonesia. So this is a picture of traditional market in Jakarta and how the traders quickly, you know, adapt through the pandemic, knowing that, you know, people are too afraid to go to the market. They right away accept delivery order, and they're equipped. And then Indonesians being the most prolific social media users, you know, they're easily transition into that mode of operation, everything online, everything connected through WhatsApp group. And this is crucial because when all the shops, all the formal sector of, you know, all supermarket or grocery shopping malls were closed down, the middle class were in a sense rescued by the readiness of the informal traders to continue to operate. And in fact, this tukang sayur and everything was so well, this is sort of vegetable and fruits sellers that actually travel across residential neighborhood. So the shop comes to you. And without having to be mediated through Uber or something like that. Obviously Grab, Indonesian version of Uber operating, but this is also something that shows what Nick mentioned earlier, this entrepreneurship that is already there. And it has spatial implication where all those isolated housing estate that is typically built and established on the fringe of major urban settlement Indonesia, away from any commercial district, not you know, it's not, there's no walking distance to any shops or market. They were rescued because the informal traders have that capacity to, in fact, reach out. And this is some of the another interesting virtual tactics that's in a way, the middle upper class in Indonesia adopt that. I guess they return to their kampung spirit. They come up with a range of collective practices to support each other's and then to make sure that, you know, you never run out of any cooking material and cooking ingredients. And then these collectivities are very important. There's a friend of mine living in North Jakarta presented how her neighborhood developed this collective shopping to make sure that neither of them have to travel to too many places. One is in charge to purchase, you know, fresh produce, one is in charge to purchase other daily goods and so on. These are the capacities that you know, reflect that particular informal urbanism that is really ingrained in Indonesia. And solidarity across class also emerging when at the early days of the pandemic, when you know, this Gojek driver, this is a motorized Uber service in Indonesia, the Green Army, they were the one, of course, who, okay, how are we going to operate, you know, with all through the pandemic? And the middle class, to some extent, their client helped them retain their livability by, you know, showing loyalties back to their Gojek drivers, and start kind of sharing among the middle class community, you know, to help the Gojek driver. And of course, they transition quite effortlessly through the pandemic, equip themselves and so on. And the informal settlements were so equipped to manage their own environment, not all of them, of course. Some of them were able to kind of, again, self-govern, self-sustain in the midst of the lack of social infrastructure in Indonesia. And then to some extent, and this is a case study in Salatiga, most of my colleagues in Indonesia were familiar with this. This is when, you know, the fact that the formal operation cities were temporarily suspended, then the informal function, informal trade were facilitated to continue to operate. And this is something that's very fascinating. That is in fact initiated by the local government. And I think that was a signal where, you know, there's a new recognition of the codependence between the formal and informal city. To some extent, I think the formal sector start kind of rebranding itself to reflect this kampung spirit, you know, to kind of incorporate the mechanism, the capacity of the informal traders in the formal online commerce, you know, the formal realm of online commerce. You know, this terminology of the pasar or tukang sayur, pasar mean market, and tukang sayur, traditional market, and tukang sayur mean that food vendor, fresh food vendor. It's nowadays start kind of operating through app and so on. To some extent, that the Indonesian communities in Melbourne actually adopt that functioning. And this is really funny because, you know, as Indonesian living in Melbourne, we struggled the first, you know, when we had that heavy lockdown, how am I going to get some, you know, Indonesian cooking ingredients? And right away, the community group operate to distribute, you know, to somehow, you know, it's actually, it becomes kind of a renaissance of Indonesian cooking through the pandemic in Melbourne. And it's also happening with other migrant communities in Melbourne. I spoke with my colleague from Sri Lanka, from India. There's no shortage of those, you know, exotic cooking ingredients. Now, I want to go back to spatialize this, I guess, codependence between the informal and informal sectors to urban built environments. I am hopeful that with the experience of the pandemic allow us to kind of loosen up the borders, the hard borders that have existed in the last, I think, become even more the hardening of borders between the formal and informal cities in Indonesia. And I hope the pandemic sort of remind us that cities like Jakarta would not function without the capacity of the urban kampung to support you know, the operation of the cities. Even the most posh areas such as Kuningan, where, you know, office tower shopping mall and luxurious residential building were established, they won't exist without the neighboring kampung in Menteng Pulo to sustain and to provide spectrum of affordabilities that in a sense correspond with the structure of labor in the cities. There's no such thing as cities that's only catered to the middle upper class, just like what Saskia Sasson remind us. Even the most global cities still have that very complex strata of labor structures. And in fact, Jakarta kampungs and the so-called hotspot of COVID-19 doesn't always equal, so the hotspot is not the kampung. The kampungs are not the hotspot of COVID-19. So high density does not equate high infection rates. Informal kampung does not necessarily mean that they are kind of the source or the hotspot of spread of the virus. And another capacity is this sense of belonging to their neighborhood. It's so valuable. And this is something that more recent urban production perhaps overlooked, that capacity to maintain urban space or to care about urban space relate to that sense of belonging that exists in this informal neighborhood more so than in the formal satellite housing estate, where people tend to just retreat to their own house and the rest of the open space, public space, belong to no one and no one care about it. And this is the story of Kampung Tongko, a community in North Jakarta who were able to somehow turn around its situation of being threatened for eviction into a community that take charge of upgrading its own settlement along the riverbank of Anak Kali Ciliwung, and it was featured in The Guardian. And I think I just want to quickly move to the traveling studios again to highlight the capacity of the kampung, the kind of the smartness of kampung urbanism that we need to build on. Because to assume that kampung is something that has to be developed into a new cities is a really a wasteful exercise, similar to what Hemanta earlier pointed out, that there is already an existing capacity that we need to sustain. And this is something that the traveling studio try to pay attention to. And some of the precedents out there that we explore is Alejandro Aravana's work. He's from Chile, and he argued that as an architect, we also need to think about the well-being and dignity of all citizens of the earth. So we're not just designing cities or building for our clients in traditional sense, the middle class or the upper class. And this is something Balkrishna Doshi certainly his work spoke about that spirit as well. It's the role of architects, and I would extend that the role of urban designer and also urban planner in contemporary Indonesia. Are we only supposed to build monuments? Are we only supposed to work for clients? And it's about really strengthening and harnessing that social consciousness in our duty as a built environment professional. And we'll also learn from a lot of our colleagues from Indonesia, and it is, I'm sure you know, Dedi Wahyudi and Nelly Daniel, who also teach at ITB and practice in Bandung. This all capacity to strengthen the existing urbanism in Indonesian cities. And we know the work of Romo Mangun's very pioneering in situ upgrading of kampung settlement. Here is from the settlement in Yogyakarta. So just to kind of highlight what we are doing in Bandung, this is a neighborhood that's very close to ITB, the kampung in between ITB and Jalan Cihampelas. And we basically asked 3 questions. How do we design with urban informality? How do we envision the in-between cities? And then how do we destabilize the formal city? And just very briefly, this Stop. Yeah, okay. What we are, we in that studio, we try to identify the capacities that we need to build on in this kampung. One of the capacity is the walkability. You know, if we talk about smart urbanism, then or smart cities is about technologies of managing transport system, movement of motorized vehicle. And we thought the positioning of kampung in Bandung is so crucial because it provides this alternative connection and to move from one side of the city to the other without having to be stuck in traffic and without having to widen the streets or incorporate any new technology, but really to kind of to highlight the connectivities that the kampung in fact serve and enable. And we kind of also identify this adaptability of building typology, this multiple articulation of civic space or communal space that we need to build on. And this idea of, okay, let's think about kampung in the way we talk about our memories of place. And how do we then situate that memories of place? And Indonesia use kampung as a description of home, kampung as a place of origin, and somehow that connotation disappear when it comes to urban development. And I think we need to kind of rethink about, you know, why are we start kind of disregarding the capacity of the kampung. So I think in terms of the smartness of the kampung that we need to continue to realize is this walkability and connectivities that the kampung create, and adaptability and multiplicity. Many kampung in Indonesian cities quickly transform itself to complement any new urban development in the area. When there is a university popping up, they right away provide affordable housing. They right away offer affordable eateries for students. When a shopping mall pop out, then they provide affordable eateries for the workers of the shopping mall. Something that were not designed formally by the developers because they're not seen as profitable or they're not seen as part of this vocabulary of urban spectacle. And I guess it's to also highlight sense of agency. I think we need to kind of in discussing about smart cities in Indonesia, I think we need to start questioning whether planning the cities in a smart way is about going toward a certain form of cities, or is it about kind of creating a certain mode of production that is smart? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amanda, for your presentation. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for our fifth speaker in this seminar. The next session, I will try to moderate the question and answer session from the participant. I'll share my screen. Can you see my screen? Yep. Here is the Here is the question and answer that I have recapitulated from the chat. There are several questions and answer, and then several of them have been replied by the speakers. This is the first question from Julie Miao to Professor Nicolas Pelp. Who to blame for this over-focus on the present, academic, corporate, politician, or all of this? And then Dimas Anindito, adding Julie, is it also the origin of which urban planning, learning about the future, distinguishes itself from urban science, learning about now, in a highly granular temporal resolution? There is any comment from Professor Nicolas Pelp?
Yeah, I think I try to respond to some of the questions in the chat, but maybe not all of them. I think probably most of the actors are quite enamored with technology. Apart from people like me, I think it's exciting to many people who are younger than me. So, you know, a lot of people are attracted by it, and I think politicians are probably quite seduced by having the likes of control rooms, because it fits in with their, you know, their view of themselves as, I guess, you know, mayors or leaders of cities. So, I mean, academics, I think you can detect already that probably in the academic sphere, there's a kind of polarization of approaches, some of which are very technology leaning and generally very positive about the potential for lots of data, real-time data, etc. are now pretty rapidly emerging, I think, more of a sort of social critique. So possibly, unfortunately, the academic commentary is becoming quite polarized quite quickly. But I think, you know, technology is interesting. I mean, you know, just, you know, thinking about Indonesia, this probably relates to another question that popped up. I mean, doing the work with Adiwan, you know, I was really struck by, you know, not just the sort of take up of wanting to create new apps among young Indonesians, but the huge possibility that exists. I mean, this came up in a different conversation that I was having or listening to about the fact that, well, the technology is there, perhaps the ability to code something is there. There's sort of no potential limit on the kind of the services that you could dream up, really, on the back of availability of data. Doesn't mean to say that those services are always great, good, useful, and it doesn't always mean to say that some of those services might unleash something that we don't really want. It's hard to tell from this moment in time. You know, I mean, think about all the unintended things that, you know, that might come from some sort of app. So how to select or how to be judicious about all of the possible new services, products that might be invented is a question I don't think any of us had the answer to. Yeah, so over focus on the present, I think, is probably everyone's kind of contributing to that. You know, the speed up of society means that we deal with what's in front of us right now, and we have less and less time to pause and have a think about it. How we get that into all of our daily lives, I'm unsure. Even the university sector, where we're supposed to have time to think about things, has, you know, the time we've got has been increasingly squashed. So the whole pace of academic life and work has changed enormously and sped up. And that second comment there about urban science was an interesting one, really. I think it's quite a fair comment. You know, there are a group of I suppose urban planning academics who would be very much at the urban science end of things and possibly see no particular conflict between what they're up to and what urban planning is about. I mean, people like Mike Batty, I think, are great exponents of the use of sort of big data and using it to think about cities as complex systems. I do sometimes think that they get quite enamored by modeling the city based upon sort of mathematics or physics principles, which, you know, there may be some sort of correspondence or what's the word, you know, analog, but it's unclear how that then informs what you do about the city or what you could do with the city. So I think I feel a little bit uncomfortable with some of that urban science celebration of the sort of patterns of urban development mimicking, you know, natural processes in physics or whatever. I don't know if that answers the question, but maybe Julie's also got something to add in there too.
Thank you for Professor Nicolas for your answer. And then I will continue to the next slide about the question from you, maybe to all of the speakers, about Amanda raises an interesting point about what orientation of planning is now after Suharto. The plan new capital may be not the best reference point to consider this. Maybe the speaker, Pak Adiwan? can answer this question, or if other speakers want
I'm interested to know where we're up to with this, because the last thing I read, which was actually, I think, when I was in Indonesia with Adiwan, was an article, a newspaper article, and it horrified me. It was along the lines of inviting all the great and the good, essentially world-leading politicians to come and, you know, create some sort of think tank, some dreadful political leadership think tank to you know, it sounded a bit strange, but I don't know where we're up to now.
Yeah. Thank you. So maybe I will continue.
And maybe just quickly, and very even worrying is the involvement of I think developers and to kind of determining the early construction of the capital city, and kind of this is about conversion of land speculation in East Kalimantan, in an area that is so vulnerable as an ecosystem, as so socially disadvantaged or kind of excluded from development, and to kind of see the capital city, the new capital, to be determined by those in powers. It's really a worrying direction. So hopefully the pandemic provide time to kind of stop that process and rethink what is it that the capital trying to achieve. If it's true, like what Jokowi said, it's about bringing the development of the countries to the region, then, you know, what are the development that the region need? It should not be determined by the center again and again.
Well, also, as I think there's a comment here from, is it Dimas, saying, you know, it's all increasingly, you know, we live in a sped up world. We have virtual connections in a way which we didn't have even, what, 30 years ago. And so the interreferencing, or the grabbing, the sort of cutting and pasting of planning concepts, architectural context out of context. You know, I mean, we were talking earlier, I think, about things should be in context. But the potential for them to be out of context has never been greater, because, you know, what do you do if you're a planning consultant? You go and grab something off the internet, you know, that looks something like it could be useful, or as an architect, you know, possibly the tendencies are just as bad. So it's quite frightening, really. You know, grab a bit of everything that seems cool and you know, and stuff it all in one place, completely out of context. It could end up as, you know, what the capital city in Kazakhstan. I think it used to be called Astana. It's been renamed, but that's been called the sort of the strangest or the weirdest capital in the world, because it's got this sort of incredible mix of architectural styles, and it's a scary prospect, I think.
Thank you for the answer, Amanda and Nicolas.
I would like to add on what Nick already mentioned earlier about contextualization importance. I think that is also what Julie presented earlier, that Melbourne smart city maybe came from its previous knowledge policy. And in Bandung case, it initiated from its creative and cultural industry initiative in the mid 2000s. So I think for two cities such as Melbourne and Bandung that historically have their own history or policy previously, it won't change much. But for a new capital city like what Nick are concerned about, perhaps that could be maybe that you mentioned earlier, grabbing from something in the internet and then put it there without any historical ideas there. Although in the last 2-3 months, our colleagues here in ITB, especially Delek, has collaborated with Bappenas and also with MIT to analyze on how urban and regional planning should be developed there. If you're interested, I think I can ask Delek to invite you also, Nick, to our discussion with MIT and Bappenas also, because of course, it's troubling for us also. If you build something out of from the scratch, There's no historical background for it, and anything could be possible as a stepping stone from that. And of course, that is what we like to hinder, I think, in urban planning. Thank you. Maybe Julie has some information about what Nick mentioned earlier, because in Indonesia, we are very much like to have everything quantified, like indicators of smart cities, how do you measure smart cities, and those kind of things. Nothing beyond that, I think. I'm not sure, is that also the case in Melbourne with your spider indicators earlier, maybe? Thank you.
Yes, actually, I was doing another related project, and through that, I did some national state government officials.
Can't hear you, Julie.
Sorry, your voice is not too clear.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Julie, yeah.
Oh, okay, let me. How about now? No?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what's the problem. So maybe I will skip this question and we can move on.
I think she can't fix it, so it might be better to move on. I think she has a problem with the microphone.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for your explanation. I'll continue to the next slide about the question to Professor Hemanta Doloi, but yeah, from Busri Mariati, is there any rejection from certain communities group to the carried out? And then question from Nadia Putri Utami, aside of the housing infrastructure, is there any smart village solution to disaster like flood risk management in rural areas? And Mr. Dolo.
Yeah, thank you. I think answering the first question, in fact, to our surprise, there was no any rejection by the community. They were very much happy to be involved at the grassroots level. But when we were going, especially quite a few times, I have met those villagers and then interacted with them. And I had quite a few other colleagues from my research group. They think that, my God, in their lifetime, they have ever seen that somebody coming and talking to them about what they have, what they need, and what are the priorities and things like that. So most of the time government come and because in India, there are four different types of governments, different tiers: central government, state government, district government, and the local government. So the plans are done at the central level, and some of the plans are also done at the state level, but they are then given to the district level, and district level then gives to the local level, and local level then starts implementing it. So, and they never had any participation from the community with a first-hand kind of approach. So bottom-up approach is not there. So, and most of the time, the community is kept at dark. So they are not quite happy with their interventions. And many of the times, many of the interventions that government rolls out, they do not really meet the requirements from the community. So when we actually talk to them through our data collection process, we have got so much more than what we expected. They were opening up. And that was one of the greatest strengths that we have identified in our first-hand data collection process. So that was really good. And second question here, I think again, most all the speakers actually talked about that contextual relevance of the work, contextualization of the solution. And this is where we also believe in Smart Villages research program, that any problem that the villagers face, solution has to come from within, from them. So it is not a top-down scientific approach that can solve the local problems. You see, the flood problem today in Assam is almost like a national problem. Every time flood happens, people have got nowhere to go. State government do not have enough resources to be able to deploy, and they always pressurize the central government to announce the national calamity each year. But how central government can always announce the state of emergency every year in monsoon season for Assam? because once they announce that national calamity as a national of that particular event, then they get the almost like blank check. Everybody waits for that, right? So actually, the actual problem has come from the ground level. Somebody has, imposed the housing solutions in a complete wrong context. So if you ask the local people, then how these people have ever lived by the flood, how would like to solve the flood problem in their own kind of effort, they have got all the solutions. And that those solutions are not necessarily to be very expensive solutions, but people are in the scientific approach that the government adopts. Usually they do not have any way to get those people into their side and devise the solution collectively. And India is one of the worst case scenarios where that citizens' participation is not quite done to the level that they should do. And they are now emphasizing more, but there is no any kind of streamlining process at this moment. And I think my answer to that question is that, yes, the solutions we have not talked in general because we were never interested to develop a top-down solution. We were always interested to take the community and devise the solution, whatever the problem they may have. And this flood will be also resolved if that is there in that particular context through the local people.
Thank you for Dr. Hemanta Doloi for your answer to two questions from the participant. And then the next is the question from Galuh Syabana Arif Indra Prahasta to Pak Adiwan Aritenang. If contextualization or provincialization in smart city development should be encouraged, what kind of environment is needed, given the fact such process requires a democratic governance? For me, this is important to prevent local-driven government projects that potentially hinder the emergence of technological initiative from below. Please, Pak Adiwan.
Yes, thank you. I think this is related with our discussion earlier, also with Nick. In Indonesia, the case that I saw here with several projects that I am involved in, they are very much concerned with indicators, quantitative measures, graphics, and those kind of things to make sure that their city are included as a smart city. And after that, they expect that they could quote unquote promote their city as a smart city. But I think the most important thing is that how does this wording and provincializing notion are implemented in Indonesia, because different city has different kind of needs to be what does Nick mentioned earlier. Smart means that better response to the community between Jakarta and Bandung. Perhaps it will be different, and also with other cities in other islands like Sumatra or Sulawesi. So I think it's very much important to each city to identify themselves. How do they respond, or they fulfill the needs of their own cities? I think that is the most important, rather than copying directly from other smart cities in the world. I think that's my take. Maybe Nick or other panelists have a different view. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Adi. I mean, I can add a little bit of something in here. I mean, one thing that occurs to me is that, from what I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, sometimes we talk about government being inefficient, bureaucratic, not very helpful, but I think in quite a lot of cities and communities in Indonesia, government has been quite important in setting entrepreneurship going, even through central programs. Having done work with other Indonesian colleagues in Semarang, not the same sort of tradition as you might have in Bandung there, and government as a sort of outsider to communities, kampung people, or indeed migrants coming from other parts of Indonesia, have been quite important to getting the entrepreneurial spirit going, let's say. So it's definitely not one size fits all. Second bit of research that, before I say about the second bit of research, but it strikes me that, you know, if you've got citizens, you've got states, governments, and you've got sort of clubs like corporations, I think increasingly, both in Global North and Global South, there's a need for sort of additional venues that are not owned or managed by any of those entities, that are spaces in which, you know, policy can be developed, or thinking the unthinkable, or broaching difficult subjects can happen. We see this a little bit in places like the UK, where, you know, government isn't able anymore to, through the planning process, to really persuade people, or indeed may not be a trusted host for discussions. So maybe some new venue of some sort has to be created, or a new forum that has some resource, but is basically independent of these other actors. And just to sort of come back to that other bit of research I mentioned, you know, doing some work with Holly Binawijaya at Undip in Semarang, well connected across central Java. I think he had done some sort of monitoring exercise looking at local governments and how they were trying to support different industry clusters, and the whole object there was to sort of try and facilitate sort of bottom-up solutions to making decisions about which industries to support and in what ways, and different local governments territories came up with slightly different solutions. You know, sometimes it was purely within the government sector, the local planning department. Sometimes it was a kind of arm's length kind of committee that got involved. Sometimes it was the sort of Chamber of Commerce or local business grouping that did it. So a bit of experimentation there is probably no bad thing, and you know, in some contexts it would have worked better than others. So I think it's one of those things that's up for discussion. You know, should we be licensing new venues, new groupings, whose task is precisely to facilitate some of these sorts of discussions, and maybe they come and they disappear. I think it's an interesting general, you know, a topic for general discussion, really.
Yeah, if I may quickly add, I just want to underscore what Nick just said, that many medium-sized cities in Indonesia is really understudied, despite the fact that they are quite pioneering in terms of bottom-up development, and we urgently need to look beyond, you know, the usual suspect, Jakarta, Surabaya, even Yogyakarta, you know, and perhaps also beyond Bandung, you know, despite Bandung being such a fascinating laboratory. But yeah, it's time to start kind of knowing what happened in those medium-sized cities. I think medium-sized cities is important because they, in the sense that they're agile, and then somehow the problem is not as problematic as what happened in larger cities in Indonesia.
Thank you, Pak Adiwan, Nicolas, and Amanda for your answer. And then I will continue to the next slide. This is Raghu has answered the question. Are there any initiatives implemented in the customer level in the case of water supply and sanitation? And I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I think there are quite a few initiatives on water supply and sanitation which have been under process before the Smart City program, but they got converted into the Smart City projects under the mission. So quite a few on the water metering, the leak detection, how do you improve the water supply, 24/7 equivalent projects. But if you are there, like on sanitation side as well, in terms of utilize activities. So City program have given a fillip to some of these activities, but even otherwise we have gone through, but now it is, I think, getting implemented. Thank you.
Thank you, Raghu, for your answer. And then the question from Murshal Manaf. In many cases, and the potential of villages in Asia, including Indonesia, is one of them related to tourism. How can the concept of approach of smart village and smart tourism be applied simultaneously? Maybe the answer from Hamanta and Raghu first.
Yeah, I think I did mention that on by writing as well, the answer. This is, you see, smart villages, once you develop it, idea here is that we want to highlight the potential of the people and their heritage, their culture, their values. And these things are very important for the others to know from outside, right? So talking about, say, in Indian context, there are 600,000 villages in India. And every single village has got a very unique characteristic, characteristics. They have got different culture, different food culture, different dialogues, different ways of perceiving their space and their heritage, and everything is different. So if those people all basically, somehow promote their own culture, and of course there has to be an international standard for tourists to come and witness that sort of lifestyle. There has to be some sort of modernization, but not necessarily to be always modernization to be done with a traditional approach. So every single cottage doesn't have to be brick and mortar. So if those people can highlight their own values and culture within their own settings, that will be a great attraction for the others to come and enjoy that lifestyle, right? That is what the tourists do. And interestingly, tourists always, whenever tourists comes, there is no shortage of fund, the money, because people make money throughout their life, throughout their time. And the moment they become a tourist, they bring the pot of money and wanted to spend, wanted to really enjoy their life, wanted to really explore everything around them, right? So there is no any budget. So people come with the money and they spend the money and they go back empty-handed. That is what the nature of the tourism, right? So you see, but we have to somehow bring those kind of culture and the spots into the tourist map, so that people know anywhere in the world that if you go to that part of India or that part of Indonesia, in that particular village, this is what I can see, which I cannot see anywhere in the world. So they will come from wherever they are, and they will dump their tourist money, in that settings. So that is where the tourism and income generation potential, everything can grow. So smart village has got that potential, and that is something that we need to really work with the people to generate the awareness, and then harness that potential.
Thank you, Hermanta, for your answer. Any other answer from the speakers?
I'm happy to add to that, but maybe Raghu, you want to add to that first?
Yeah. So, see, I don't think there are conflicting positions to have a smart village and a smart tourism in that angle. There are quite a few debate which has happened to promote tourism. As Hemant has been saying, it ultimately depends upon what that particular group wants and what they want to do with their village or with their habiting. Tourism obviously increases the footfalls. Once footfalls come in, there's a need for other infrastructure, need for, there could be a chance of the existing ecosystem getting damaged a little bit. So there's always a call between whether they want it, don't want it. There are initiatives that have happened in the, South Asia context, what I can see. Quite a few places, there's the locals have done something which they think is important, and had to put a cap on how many people they would willing to kind of entertain in the tourism context. So it's not a conflicting position. They can go together. The question of how much you want, and that's ultimately about smart. They decide what they think is appropriate. So it can be done in that sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Raghu. And Amanda, you want to?
Yeah, my dissertation is on Bali, and it's all about understanding the impact of tourism, cultural tourism, even on the vernacular heritage. And I think tourism changed place, because tourists bring with them this very disciplining gaze of otherness. And with the case of Bali, the traditional village is are clearly part of what tourists are looking for, but they are outside the infrastructure of tourism, as Raghu mentioned earlier. They don't have an agency. They are sort of treated as an object, and there's a danger of not offering the local people a more meaningful role in tourism than being, this other body, other realities to kind of contrasting to tourist urban cosmopolitan reality, modernity elsewhere. And I think, even in the village such as Ubud, one of the oldest destinations in Bali, where the earliest form of tourist accommodation is the local themselves subletting a room in their house, in their dwelling compound for tourists, they have suffered so much because suddenly their house is a commodity. And on top of that, their house has to be preserved in a certain way. So all of a sudden, a dynamic cultural landscape is sort of simplified as exotic other. And this is something that we need to learn from Bali's experience. I know Indonesia is promoting the New 10 Bali and so on. We need to be smarter in sort of positioning ourselves as tourist destination. And the smart village, I think, has to come first before, village tourism, what have you. They need to be able to see what they want for their community, and then tourists can come after that. They should not simply be the object of tourist search for otherness. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda, for your answer. And for the last question from Ibu Sri Mariati, I'll read. We found that community in Kampung has social innovation during COVID-19 pandemic, especially related to the use of public facilities like MCK or public wells. Do you think it can be included as smart city initiative? Please, Dr. Amanda.
Short answer to that, definitely. And Ibu Sri is an expert. You've already, observing that capacity for so many years. And I'm always puzzled how Indonesian government somehow see as if nothing has happened. And certainly so in terms of, creating that capacity, that infrastructure in terms of public toilet. And we know that some of the informal settlements in Indonesia were treated as non-urban, thus all the infrastructure development exclude them. I think somehow, sometimes purposely, because they continue to become very, deteriorating through time. So those bottom-up capacity to create their own infrastructure, something that we need to build on. It's already there. So if we want to kind of improve, expand the infrastructural capacity of the city, there's already an existing skeleton that the government can strengthen, so transforming their building on that capacity. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can just chip in a little bit, but I mean, it's something that struck me a little bit, having done a little bit of research with Julie Miao on smart city initiatives in a few different cities. That's where I got some of my information from, but traveling to New York, probably the place you would least expect it, but relating to this sort of, the way in which smart means different things to different segments of the population, even in the global north. I mean, clearly there's potential to make money and profit out of new sources of data, urban data, but certainly we were aware in New York that there was quite a bit of formation of new businesses precisely around sort of social issues, social entrepreneurship, social innovation, precisely to sort of, I suppose, partly push back against some of what was perceived as perhaps the undemocratic nature of what was going on. So I think even in some global north context, there's a lot more interest among certain groups now in social innovation, social entrepreneurship, and surely some of that must be, based around, sort of smart, big, or real-time data that's available and what it can be used for, partly to possibly I think the case that was being, from memory, the thing that was being investigated in New York, but this is just one example of one company, was I think to do with sort of rents and housing conditions, you know, so unscrupulous landlords basically charging a fortune to keep a check on that, basically on behalf of renters, you know. So I think there must surely be quite a big potential there across global north and south, and it would be a really interesting thing to get a sense of just what proportion of innovations or companies being set up have this sort of social mission to them.
Thank you for Professor Nicolas. Any other comment from our speakers? If there is, okay. Maybe I'll give the participant to ask directly to our speaker. Please, if you still have any question, please raise your hand and I can. Yeah. Any other question from our participant?
If not, Uli,
yeah.
I think Adiwan has asked me to sort of say a few words at the end, if there aren't any questions. I don't have any pre-prepared words, but I guess the first words must be thank you to yourself, Uli, and obviously the Dean for introducing the session, and Adiwan for putting it all together as well, and of course to all of the speakers who've contributed on this topic. So thank you to everyone for making for a really interesting afternoon, covering a lot of ground, urban and rural, sort of physical and data, sort of abstract and very concrete ideas. So really interesting. Great to see so many people from both of our faculties interested in a topic like this. I think it's something we could possibly take forward. I know I've mentioned this before, I think to one or two people, but we have three sort of regional stroke country strategies at University of Melbourne. So China, Indonesia, and India. And I would imagine that the idea of smart cities, stroke urbanization, probably would be something that could be mobilized across those three priorities. And I guess at the moment there are priorities in University of Melbourne. There are other sort of geographical strategies which are bubbling up, but for the time being, they're the ones that are perhaps easiest to mobilize in terms of seed funding. So there might be something to be done there in terms of pulling some of the existing interests, you know, together to sort of apply across the three strands, or perhaps bring, you know, those three countries into sort of comparison, if you like, in some kind of way. So that was something I think I'd like to go back to, and maybe I can, you know, talk to each of the discipline people and perhaps even across discipline to do something there. Open to suggestions to people as well. We've already got quite a few collaborations working. So we've had, I think, Delic visit as a staff member before COVID. So he had an office for a couple of weeks, I think, to start writing a paper while he visited University of Melbourne. Obviously, I think a few people will want to get back to ITB as soon as, you know, travel starts to resume and it's, you know, possible. So there's that sort of collaboration, which I think will happen. We've mentioned the discussions that have started on the exchange of students at undergraduate level in architecture and urban planning, the sort of internationalization of the ITB sort of curriculum, and Melbourne is very happy to play a role there. And you know, stay in touch with me if there's anything that pops up there and seems to be getting in the way, or if you haven't got an answer to some of that. I know that it's in the process. There is a piece of funding that we applied for jointly, that is myself as Associate Dean, and then also Durley Matteo Babiano as Associate Dean, Diversity and Inclusion. And that was to get some small funding to, I guess, basically think beyond perhaps the idea of a few extra students coming from ITB, but to think a little bit bigger, perhaps things like dual degrees, or perhaps, you know, if we can do more in terms of some of the funding that is available, I think, for doctoral students as well, to create more links there. We weren't successful this time, but I think we will try and apply again for that, and not to get you worried in ITB, but I think one part of what we were doing was also potentially opening a few conversations with one or two other planning stroke architecture faculties. So obviously at the moment we only have ITB as a key partner at faculty level in Indonesia, but we're conscious there's a couple of other, you know, universities where, you know, maybe worth at least starting a conversation with, and at least advertising ourselves to them. So I think we will try that again next opportunity. And I think that probably the other thing is obviously to share among ourselves whatever tips or insights we have, you know, about possible, at the end of the day, it doesn't require funding necessarily, but some funding sources is useful to have. It can facilitate things. So, you know, if people are aware of them, and I'm certainly don't have a full awareness of everything that's out there, that is a good thing to share, I think, among us. I don't know if I can add an awful lot more to that just at the moment. It's great that you've recorded it, so that's, you know, it's a great resource probably for both communities. So you're welcome to share that with us, and we don't know quite how we would use it, whether we were able to put it up on our website, but we might be able to do that as well. Amanda, I noticed you've unfrozen your microphone, so you must be waiting to say something here. Yeah.
Thank you, Nick. I would like to propose maybe an opportunity to start workshopping joint application for some of the multi-year research funding based on the collaboration between ITB and the University of Melbourne. I think there is an accumulating track records of collaboration, and I know that LPDP and DICTI have also approached the University of Melbourne through a different link directly to DVC International. I think, but it has to be somehow initiated by our ITB counterparts because they'll be the main applicants and we'll be the partner. So I think that's a fascinating. I know that the Indonesian government, the shift towards funding international collaboration is quite significant the last 5 years, and hopefully we can be part of that shift.
Good.
Yes,
Anyone?
maybe a small comment, Nick, and also Mandy. So we will also try to find that the source of funding. Mandy also mentioned about the opportunity to have a collaboration on research, and we will maybe we need to have a detailed conversation on this later, maybe.
I think with the people that have signed up to this seminar, I mean, and I think there will be others who haven't, you know, we haven't managed to touch or get to present here, but there's certainly a lot of interest, I think, in many of the issues broadly defined, not just the smart side of it, but all the other issues that it touches upon. Urban informality, for example, there's surely a big, you know, interest in our faculty there. So, you know, let's bear that in mind as well, I think. Adiwan, did you want to mention anything at the end as well?
Yes, thank you very much, Nick, Amanda, and also with Raghu, Julie, and also Hemanta. I think your presentation has been very wonderful, providing us with so much insight, because especially for us in Indonesia, international insights and also collaboration are very much needed, because of course we have a lot of cities, a lot of districts that requires various knowledge from other cities and countries worldwide. Regarding our collaboration, I really look forward for our collaboration with all of you, I think, especially later if Bu Uli is allowed to go to Melbourne, perhaps we can meet together in Melbourne or maybe in Bandung also. And but I think the thing that in terms of undergraduate and also postgraduate is that how our collaboration could provide insight for our students with international exposure in both academically and also networking, because I think that is very important. And once a collaboration has been conducted, I think the only way is to go forward and expand it. Thank you very much.
One final thought that flashed through my mind. I have no idea how to do this, but you know, assuming the capital city project kind of rumbles on and does something, wouldn't it be quite an interesting thing to have a sort of parallel? Have what do they call it? Digital twins. It wouldn't necessarily be a digital twin, but it'd be an academic twin to formal capital city planning. You know, the students, perhaps of both universities and staff, kind of doing an alternative version of capital city. Anyway, I haven't really fully thought it out, but it was kind of something based around a concrete idea or project or something that is desired or wanted for some reason. But anyway, I don't know if there's any possibilities there, but I haven't thought about it and what it might mean. Anyway,
yes, we have the join studio also. I think maybe that one way to conduct your idea also, Nick.
Yeah, I just dropped it in there as like a bomb and let it explode and see what happens. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think probably in the interests of looking after babies and things like that, which I know I've got to do now, I'll break off. And if there aren't any other further closing comments, I think just to say thank you to everyone for participating, and that includes all the questions that have come in. And I think at one point we got up to 68 or so in the audience, which is a pretty good number, I think, for a session like this. So thanks to everyone for organizing a great session. It's been great also to participate from my personal point of view. And Uli, thank you for coordinating things and asking the questions as well. Okay, so maybe
one last point, if I may just add, again, thank you very much for this opportunity that I got, and get to know each other. I was not quite sure about this whole collaboration, but it was a very kind of Nick that invited me to speak, and that has really given me that opportunity to be able to highlight our smart villages work. So as I mentioned briefly that we do have an international conference. That is the interest that we have got just to grow that conference. And then that conference itself is a forum for anyone to come and then promote their ideas, whatever it could be. I think Indonesia also will be greatly benefited by having those rural nurturing them in their own settings rather than bringing them into the complete urbanization settings. So that way, just a quick reminder of the website that we have. I just quickly share that one, if you don't mind, to give you this idea that where you can get the information from.
If you have the email addresses, everyone, maybe you want to circulate it as well after?
That I can do as well. I think this is our web page. You can see this University of Melbourne's page. smartvillageslab.msd.ud, University of Melbourne, email.edu.au. And this is where we promote our conference, first page. Anyway, I will just pass this one on the box as well. So it'll be good to get some papers from from Indonesia. And it's a very low cost conference, only $150 registration fee. But most of the time we end up getting the sponsor and waive the registration fee as well. And over the last 2 years, it is happening as a webinar, but yet the peer review conference. And if any ideas that people are talking about or thinking about, it's a great forum to publish a paper or publish a poster. We also have the design poster competition as well. Thank you.
Thank you for Dr. Hemanta. Any other comment from our speakers?
I just want to thank everyone for this opportunity. It's been a pleasure to talk to everyone, and we look forward to collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Raghu. Before the seminar closes, maybe we can take a picture together. Maybe for all speaker and all participants, please turn on the camera so I can take a photo of us. Yeah, please. Oops, sorry. Oops, yeah, I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay, please turn on the camera of all participants. We have 52 participants in this seminar. Please, okay. We have 3 pages and I'll count 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, 1, 2, and 3. First, then, oops. And then the second page. 1, 2, and 3. Oops. And the last page. 1, 2, and 3. Thank you for joining this seminar, and thank you for your participation. See you on another joint seminar session. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Selamat siang, selamat sore.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Bye
Bye-bye.
very much.
Dr. Hemanta,
See you.
thank you. Dr. Raghu, thank you.
Terima kasih Bu Li, terima kasih Bu Deka.
Terima kasih.
Pak Adiwan, Bu Li.
Ya, terima kasih.
Ya.
Terima kasih semua. Selamat siang.